Good evening and Happy New Year. This is the January 2nd monthly meeting of the Boston Civic Design Commission, and I'm now calling it to order. The open meeting law requires that I notify the public that this meeting is being recorded. So please note that the audio recording of this meeting is being made by the BPDA staff. My name is Mimi Love. I am the chair of the BCDC. I am joined tonight, this evening, with my co-chair, Linda Easley. Over 30 years ago, the commission was established to ensure that the architecture and urban design of new projects in the city of Boston have a positive impact on the public realm. I'd like to thank our fellow commissioners for donating their time, sharing their valuable insights, and shaping the city of Boston into a more beautiful, sustainable, and equitable city for all of its citizens. In light of some recent news of Steve Coyle, the former BRA director, I'm going to ask Bill Ron to chime in here and reflect a little bit on his tenure.
Thank you, Mimi. I thought it was particularly appropriate because while Steve was BRA director from, I think it was 84 to 92, he did lots of innovative things in the city, and linkage and a bunch of other policies are very much the product of his era here. He was a very dynamic, likable guy who loved to come to work in tennis shoes and without a tie, and he was a great believer in a public design review process. So about halfway through his tenure here, he almost single-handedly created a design review platform, insisted that it get integrated into the zoning code, which it has been. And he pushed it very strongly, led the appointment of the original, I think there were 11 original members, both architects, landscape architects, urban designers, but also citizens of the city. And so I was one who was appointed, and I'm still here. He would chuckle because he loves these kind of little factoids. But I think it's appropriate for all of us to thank Steve and for what he did and what he created, and the fact that he studied various alternative methods, and he came up with one which lasted now 34 years, and with some recent amendments by Diana and the mayor and the BPDA, may design review continue for another 34 years here in Boston. So I just want to acknowledge the importance of Steve to what this commission is all about. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. I think that's a great reflection on why we're all here and a great way to start 2024. So with that, I'm just going to call all of the commissioners that are in attendance. Please say present when I call your name. Amy Chambers. I believe I saw Amy. Amy, are you there?
I'm here. Sorry, I'm
right.
present.
Thank you. Linda Easley.
Present.
Jonathan Evans.
Present.
Diana Fernandez.
Present.
David Hassin.
Present.
Anne Marie Lubenow.
Present.
David Manfredi.
Present.
David. All right, thank you. Catherine Morris.
Happy New Year, present.
Happy New Year. Bill Ron.
Present.
Laura Solano.
Present.
Kirk Sykes.
Present.
And myself, Mimi Love. Thank you for attending today's meeting. Next, moving on to the approval of the minutes. Do I hear a motion to approve the meeting minutes for the December 5th monthly meeting and the December 19th design committee meeting?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Thank you. And with that, I'm going to call the commissioners Linda Eastley,
Yes.
Jonathan Evans,
Yes.
David Hassin,
Yes.
Anne Marie Lubenow,
Yes.
David Manfredi,
Oh, you can't hear me.
David,
Yes.
thank you. Catherine Morris,
Present, yes.
Bill Ron,
Present.
Laura Solano,
Yes.
Kirk Sykes,
Yes.
and myself, Mimi Love. So with that, the December meeting minutes are approved. So next we have an update from on the Boston Design Vision Initiative by Diana Fernandez, our Deputy Chief of Urban Design. So I think with that, I will pass it along to the BPDA staff to set it up. And Diana.
Thank you so much, Mimi. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So bear with me for a second here while we get this up. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Fantastic. So we're here today to present to you some of the really exciting work that the BPDA Urban Design team has been working on over the last year, which is focused on Boston's design vision. So what we've done over the last year is really focused on both really deep research, looking at a vernacular analysis of our built environment, as well as a really robust community engagement process to develop some strategic opportunities associated with how we can define Boston's design future, one that is really aligned with designing a city for all. And really focusing on the sort of last piece, which is a sort of implementation roadmap. So we've been around and about the city this past year, engaging in a myriad of events. The images you see here are from an open house event we hosted back in the fall here at City Hall Plaza, where we were able to engage with different stakeholders around what designing Boston's future means to them. I think this also led to a series of focus group conversations, really focusing in on hearing from design professionals, those that are working in the cultural asset mapping and preservation arena, as well as developers, immigrant communities, the youth council, and new migrants coming to our city. So what I'm going to share with you today is just a little bit of a summary of some of the key findings we've been able to discern from that engagement and analysis. So the first is that, Boston really is diverse, but really more so as a whole than the sum of its parts. When we start to really dissect our city, it tracks very closely actually with our average demographics for the United States. But when we look at specific neighborhoods, we can certainly see trends of redlining and segregation that have really shaped the built environment in our city's fabric. The other piece is that, Boston's unique urban history means that a lot of our squares and corridors are a real focus. I especially love this diagram. This is sort of taking a look at different grid orientations for different cities. And you can see that Boston is certainly an outlier. It's really shaped like old world cities, not necessarily on any particular grid, a series of organic paths that really do define our city's fabric. And funny enough, London is perhaps one of our closest counterparts in terms of our street orientation. And this grid does lead to a really interesting built form, right? It's not New York City where you have these vistas. It's really defined by these really interesting intersections, these roads coming together and creating these really unique places. And these places really differ, right? So sometimes they create squares that are defined by open space. In other spaces, they are sort of a spaghetti intersection in no man's land. And in some other areas, it creates some really interesting geometries and opportunities for how we think about our built environment. The other piece is that, there is a lot of fear and a lot of the engagement we did around unchecked growth, and particularly that growth could produce more homogeneous outcomes in our city. And it was really interesting to be able to map data layers that focus not just on our demographic information, but really understanding who are we designing for, and understanding where children, where older communities are living, where folks with limited English proficiency are living, were really important to sort of defining where growth trends will come from and how we can best support those demographics. It's also a really interesting opportunity for us to identify that, the built environment and those demographic trends are particularly aligned. So when we take a look at where children and older adults are, that's very closely aligned with where we see 2 and 3 family housing typologies emerge. And certainly different sort of demographic trends laying out where you see single and apartment dwellings concentrated. It's also important to acknowledge, right, that our city is really known around the world for being an incredible historic resource. There's some really beautiful assets that define our downtown core that have been landmarked or are within a landmark district. But we have a lot of our built fabric that isn't necessarily protected through those, and also really important to think about as we look at development growth across our city and what's that context. How are we designing for place based on what is existing and what is and is not protected. The other piece that we've learned through this process is that, diversity is already shaping our city. There are moments where we chose Chinatown here, where you have symbolic gestures, whether that's the Chinatown Gate or the Embrace Memorial. But there's also sort of the everyday urbanism. This image here on the right really reflects a lot of the really interesting altercations that happen to the built form. You can see how these 18th, 19th century buildings were retrofitted to reflect the identities of the communities in this neighborhood. And, it's a really interesting opportunity for us here at the BPDA to really look at what our guidelines and policies are that either prevent or would preclude a lot of this ability for communities to manifest their identities in their built environment. So, the goal of this design study is really to look at ways in which design can anchor identities of our communities and really center this notion of belonging throughout our city, and how that translates into the built environment overall. So looking at both architecture, open spaces, sidewalks, to really define how we create a city for all. And, there's a lot of questioning around, well, why design vision? Why are we doing this? Why at this moment? And it was really important for us to understand that we want to be able to grow by design, that design is really at the center of our growth in the city, and that we want to ensure that we are creating places that reflect the character of our city and Boston's really multifaceted identity. And also that we're centering equity in this, that we're looking at multiple identities as part of the larger collective, and really responding to our priorities around diversity. And then finally, that we're planning for design, really looking at the design vision, as an opportunity to advance the BPDA's goals, specifically around the development review process and reforming our planning and design. So a lot of what we've been able to discern from this is that there really is a framework for how we think about this work laying and shaping the way in which we review and do our collective design work as a city. And that is to really think about centering design from observation, really ensuring that as we embark upon each of these projects, we're building on the unique attributes of these neighborhoods, that we're looking at design and programming that's informed by community feedback and local planning processes, and also that we're designing spaces for community experiences and uses from, the sort of everyday events or these sort of, fun periodic moments, such as this sort of concert happening on the street. The other piece, and I think you all as commissioners can really relate to this, is that, we have to design beyond the boundaries, and that we have to look not just at the building envelope, but also the public realm, the sidewalks, the streets, that really define our places and the growth of our city, and certainly create moments for the neighborhood to anchor themselves and to create identifiable focal points in each of our neighborhood centers. And also that we need to reinvent and innovate, that we want to embrace design experimentation, specifically looking at ways in which we can deliver best practices for resilient buildings and sites, and that we can look at ways in which to retrofit our streets and our open spaces to better accommodate the needs of our communities. And that amplifying community benefits is really central to all of this, that we really want to work to identify what are those sort of community values that really shape our city, shape the unique neighborhoods in which we see these development projects emerging. So what I'm going to leave you with today is that, we're just getting started with this work, really looking at ways in which we can codify this into a design process that is looking at integrating community voice in a more integrated way. And that really starts with, who are we designing for? How do we get inspired by what exists? And how do we create moments of ideation and innovation to explore new design opportunities and really think outside of the box to ensure that we're representing all identities in our built environment. And that this work, is hard work. It requires, grounding it and refining it to realize a project that centers design excellence in all of its aspects. So, what we've focused on with the design vision has really been focused on these three buckets, the sort of spaces in between, what we call, a combination of our streets and parks, the home, which is sort of those private to public transitions and this notion of housing and infill typologies, as well as sort of main streets and neighborhood corridors. So for the purposes of our conversation today, what we want to do is to really share this work as really being integral to the way in which we move forward, understanding that the design excellence is the intersection of all of these elements coming together. And that there's a real opportunity for us to center design excellence in all the work we do. So I'll leave you with this collage here. This is some of the work that came from the design vision and the community engagement in which we took all of the cultural assets that were identified through our community process and created these collages and started to discern, those specific design elements, materials, height, transit, public realm access, small businesses, art, and open space as real drivers for ways in which we can really center design from observation and embrace a more heterogeneous city. So with that, I'll stop here and just want to thank you all and welcome your continued engagement on this work as commissioners and members of the public. As we continue shaping this and codifying it into practices and guidelines that we implement at the BPDA.
I'm mindful of time. We have a really long agenda today, but I do want to open it up for a few comments if there are any from the commissioners or questions.
I just want to say, oops, sorry. Go Commissioner Anne Marie, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Diana. It's very exciting to see the work that you and your team have been doing. And I really like the direction and the considerations that you've identified. One question that just to consider as you move forward is in how do we both identify and celebrate the unique aspects of different areas or neighborhoods of the city while also think about what unifies us, what sort of contributes to the shared identity for the city. And then my second question would just be, are there models or perhaps inspiration or models from other cities that you and your team are looking at for inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne Marie. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in the chat, but we do have a Boston Design Vision webpage where we have a host of resources. We did a really robust peer analysis when we started this process where we looked at other cities across the country and really taking a look at those elements and seeing what strategies work best for them and how we can integrate those into our process. We've also had some really wonderful and robust conversations with New York City as well and their urban design department. They took on a very sort of similar process a couple years ago. So also, taking some lessons learned from that and integrating it into the work we're doing. But I love your earlier comment. I think it's really great for us to also share that aspect of, what brings Boston together, right, is that we have all these very unique neighborhoods coming together and creating this whole, and how do we sort of uplift that more centrally on this work? Thank you.
Catherine.
Thank you. I just want to congratulate you on this presentation. It definitely is eye-opening for me, being kind of new to this commission. I think the thing I just ask you all to consider is this balance of, there was this phrase about community experiences, users, visitors, residents, and really trying to find whether it's new or an existing formula or method to the madness of how to balance that when we're talking about spaces, places in between and home, because Boston is an old city. And it's very contentious in terms of who uses space, who's moving in, who's not moving in, what happens when that space still exists or stands when the dust settles, and how that impacts this balance of different folks coming to these spaces. So just something to lift up as you all are constantly pushing and stretching the rubber band. But thank you so much for this.
Thanks, Catherine. David Hassid.
So thank you. Not to repeat, but I think that to Anne Marie's comment, one of the things I really, really liked first of all, very nice presentation. Thank you so much, Diana. It's very exciting. I really liked the street grid analysis that showed how unique Boston is as a thing, right? As an abstract entity. And the fact that London came up, I was surprised by actually some of the other cities that also had multi-pronged systems. But the fact that London came up as such an analogous city, which is also a city that has many different identities, many different communities. I hope that we're also looking abroad for examples, because in many ways, Boston is a bridge city. It's more like structurally, it's more like many European cities than it is like many American cities. So I hope we look further afield. I think that the little set of intersections, I think that would be, I'd love to get that to see how many we could name, because of just by looking at them, there were a few that I could recognize. But literally the form of so many of those spaces is, as you described, what creates identity and place in the city. And that's something that I hope we look at as the planners come to us with new projects that are in those places and spaces, reminding us of the character of those intersections, of the character of those spaces that is larger, of course, than the building itself or even the project site itself, so that we are reinforcing the character of those places. That's something that felt like that, so that diagramming actually has a life beyond this presentation. And lastly, just some discussion, I think, about, I liked Anne Marie's comment about, what unifies us, but about architecture itself, the character of the architecture itself, the materiality of the city, whether it be brick or other things. The city is changing as materials change. And in many ways, I think people perceive the change through the materiality and the, not just the scale, but the actual character of the buildings, and that should be a part of understanding what makes our neighborhoods unique, but also what makes us unique as a city relative to other cities across the country. So those 3 points, but very exciting, and I'm looking forward to hearing much more.
Thank you. And I think we probably should move on. I couldn't agree more with what each commissioner said. I'll just say, looking forward, I think about another diagram that we didn't see tonight, the overlay of resiliency, and where we have to start thinking about that, because that will very much impact character and neighborhoods. And it's a really complicated puzzle, but I think you definitely have the right focus, and excited to see what guidance you give to us moving forward in that regard as well.
Well, thank you all for your time, and certainly it's in order for us to come back to you all for a deeper dive into this work, but thank you for your comments.
Great. And so with that, let's move on to a report from Review Committee, and I'll hand it off to Christina Rico and welcome her to her first commission meeting.
Thank you, Mimi. Happy 2024 to the commission. I know I had a brief opportunity to introduce myself at the December meeting, but just wanted to take the opportunity to reiterate my appreciation for the opportunity to continue my public service here at the BPDA, and I look forward to serving the commission and this administration in this role. So for the report from Review Committee, my job here at the BPDA most recently was focused on zoning compliance, so it should surprise no one that I'll start from there, that per the regulations of Article 28 of the Boston Zoning Code, BPDA staff recommend the following proposed projects to BCDC for consideration. First, 298 Tremont Street, known as Parcel P-12C, located in Chinatown. The proposed project contemplates a mixed-use development consisting of 151,000 square feet of income restricted residential use and 2,500 square feet of commercial use, meeting the definition of large-scale development projects in Section 28-3. The proposed project site is owned by the BRA and was the subject of a public disposition process, actually culminating in an initial tentative designation award to Asian CDC by the BPDA board on December 13th of 2018. This commission then voted to recommend approval of a proposed project on this site on January 14th of 2020. Economic fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic had a significant impact on the proponent partnership, and tentative designation status was allowed to lapse. Following a second public disposition process, the BPDA board gladly reawarded tentative designation to Asian CDC on September 14th. Subsequent changes to the proposed project were significant and warranted a new project filing. A project notification form was filed on November 30th of, I was about to say this year, but I mean 2023. And BPDA staff hosted a public meeting on December 20th of 2023. And the second project BPDA staff recommend for your consideration is 180 Western Avenue, located in Alston. The proposed project contemplates a mixed-use development consisting of 186,000 square feet of residential use and a little bit more than 12,000 square feet of commercial use, meeting the definition of large-scale development projects in Section 28-3. A project notification form was filed on March 5th of 2021, and BPDA staff hosted public meetings on the project in March 23rd, 2021, April 27th, 2021, June 27th, 2023, and November 30th of 2023. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. So commissioners, I think we have to
Yes.
I need a motion to approve. We're going to do these individually. So starting with 298 Tremont Street, is there a motion to review later this evening?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All right, I'm going to call on each commissioner individually. Linda Easley,
Yes.
Jonathan Evans,
Yes.
David Hassin,
Yes.
Anne Marie Lubenow,
Yes.
David Manfredi,
Yes.
Catherine Morris,
Yes.
Bill Ron,
Yes.
Laura Solano,
Yes.
Kirk Sykes.
Recuse, right?
Thanks, Kirk. And myself, Mimi Love, yes. Okay, moving on to 180 Western Avenue. Is there a motion to review this project?
So moved.
Second?
Second,
Great. Let me go over each commissioner, starting with Linda Easley,
Yes.
Jonathan Evans,
Yes.
David Hassin,
yes.
Anne Marie Lubenow,
Yes.
David Manfredi,
I will be recused.
Catherine Morris,
Yes.
Bill Ron,
Yes.
Laura Solano,
Yes.
Kirk Sykes,
I'm not, am I recused in this one as well? I submitted it. I'm not sure.
I don't think so, according to our documents.
Okay.
We would love for you to join at the end of the meeting. It is the last
right.
one, so we'll leave it up
Thank you.
to the schedule. And then myself, Mimi Love, yes. So terrific. We'll review both projects. And then moving on to the report from Design Committee. The first project I am recused from, so I'm going to sign off and hand it off to Linda Easley, the co-chair, and rejoin for the following meeting projects.
Thanks, Mimi. I think there are 8 of us that are here tonight that are not recused from this project. So we'll be reviewing the Ave Phase 1 project. Today we're looking at the housing project, but there are other buildings and sites within the Phase 1 that will continue with our review. I'll just remind the commissioners that this particular housing project does have a financing urgency. So encourage you to be thinking about helpful comments for this proponent team as we're moving forward. And again, we'll be seeing the remainder of the Phase 1 work ongoing over the next couple of months. So I think, Christina, we're ready to have the proponent begin.
Excellent. Just a reminder to the proponent team that as you're presenting, I'll be timing. Please keep your presentation to 10 minutes. We'll give you a halfway, then a 2-minute, and then a 30-second warning.
Good evening, Commissioners. Mark Rosenshine with Trademark Partners, joined by our team from UTIL, who are the architects for the residential component. And as you mentioned, Linda, this is a little bit complicated. Phase 1, we came to you with a master plan last year, 21 acres. Phase 1 of that is 9 acres, involving 3 commercial buildings, 1 residential building, and 2 open spaces. For reasons having to do with the low-income housing tax credit application process, we've isolated 495, the residential project. We went to subcommittee on that first. We're here before the full commission to ask for your support to move that one piece forward. And then we expect to be back at subcommittee this month and for the next several months looking at the open spaces and commercial projects. So plenty of opportunity to speak to relationships between the buildings, including the residential building. We're sure there'll be some comments related from the open space to the residential building, and we'll be able to accommodate that. But wanted to look for the commission support in advance of that low-income housing tax credit application process. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael LeBlanc and ask him to walk us through the committee's comments and how we've responded.
Great. Thanks, Mark. And thank you, commissioners. So real quickly, just to remind you all, we're only talking about the 495.av portion of this project, which is the residential component, as Linda was saying. And I think 65, 75 Ellery and 505 dot will be coming shortly thereafter. Next slide. So we've got 2 groups of what we heard here. There was what we heard at the commission last time in early December, and then what we heard at committee in mid to late December, just before the holidays. So I'll focus a little bit on what we heard at the commission real quickly. You know, there were questions and concerns about massing, the relationship to the neighborhood. There was some questions which were related to the front porch of this, which is, you know, really has to do with the fact that we've got an elevated first floor here because of resiliency purposes. There was some back of house questions about how we're handling those kinds of services to the building on Alger Street, and then public realm questions about the east open space, a little bit of Ellery, and then some facade details and character kinds of questions. So at committee, we presented solutions and development and progress to all of those things. We then got, as we dug deeper into each of those topics, a few kind of detailed questions and comments began to kind of emerge out of that, having to do with what we're calling our front porch area, which is the area along Dot Ave, and a few questions pertaining to how are we, creating enough, let's say, programmatic clarity between our seniors and our outdoor dining at our food and beverage location to the southern end of that building. Looking at trying to create a more graceful approach and a more accessible approach to that porch itself and how that kind of relates to the sidewalk level at Dot Ave. And then also signage strategies and how are we dealing with those things? And that pertains to several different parts of it. Then there's the south-facing active uses, which face our east open space. There was comments about shading, about community input on the stage area that we're proposing. And then there was some more detailed comments on the facade. And really, that was really about being clarifying that this is a residential building and not a commercial building, and thinking about groupings of windows and things like that. Next slide. So real quick, I'll walk you through the plan here. This is above is what we showed to the subcommittee. Below are the changes we're proposing. They are subtle, but I think they're meaningful, and I think they were great comments that we were getting. So first, really, pertains to that issue of program clarity, and really we've got it at the north end. North is right on this image. We have our seniors porch, also our seniors lobby. There's a lounge, community room, active spaces there at that end of the building. And then as you head to the south, at the far corner at the south, which faces both the east open space and Dot Ave, we've got outdoor dining. And there was some question about the compatibility of those uses. We think it's a really good comment. Looking at the plan below, we're looking at trying through mostly furniture related interventions here, I guess, or design additions, is to create some clarity programmatically between what those spaces are and how they're being used. We're deploying some changes in the paving patterns there to kind of differentiate between those spaces where you kind of hang out and spend time versus those where you move through. We're creating a sort of waiting area outside of our what's called retail B on this, which would be our food and beverage, in the event that there's queuing, to waiting for a table or waiting to kind of make your way in. And then at the seniors porch, we were able to kind of extend how that area in between the porch and the sidewalk below extends and creates a better defined seating area for the seniors there. So really, trying to establish better, more, let's say, graceful, welcoming spaces there between them. We also, there was a comment about reducing the stairs in an attempt to kind of give more breathing room to the ramps at either end, at the north and south. We were able to achieve a less than 5% slope on the ramp at the south, which we think is great. It makes it a much more graceful approach. It's much more tricky at the north end by the seniors. And we'd really like to make it work, but we're off by about probably 20 feet worth of ramp or better.
That's halfway, Michael.
Okay, thank you. And we've also relocated the entrance to retail A to sort of give more sort of breathing room to the seniors porch there, and make sure that we don't have programmatic creep down towards that end. Next slide. So this is just a kind of before and after on the left and right about how we're dealing with a lot of those comments. You can see, first off, how we're dealing with signage along there. We've got the ability to do blade signs and that we're keeping in graphic consistency with a lot of the core holdings along Dot Ave right now. We'll have the ability to do window signage, signage on the panels between windows, and all of that. You can see on the right the much less steep, more graceful ramp, which gets visitors up to the porch level, and really creates a better parallel kind of sequence to the actual sidewalk itself. And we're also beginning to add some furniture-centered shading and things like that on the southern end of the outdoor dining. Next slide. So one of the other comments here was really about how the stage area itself interfaces with the east open space, how we are also going to try to bring the community into this. I mean, I think one of the comments was that this would be a great opportunity for a mural. The mural we're showing here is not the one that's going to remain there. This is just a placeholder, but the idea would be that we would engage the community in a process of trying to figure out what is the best solution for what could happen behind the stage, and really trying to make sure it's something that doesn't distract from any performances that might be happening, but also is something which really speaks to the community itself. We've also added shading devices and infrastructural opportunities which could sponsor lighting, sound, things like that, in addition to the shade sails that are above the stage area. Next slide.
2 minutes.
Also, just wanted to talk a little bit about the facade. There were some questions about clarifying the facade. Again, we think Boston's color green is one of its most underutilized colors, and people should embrace it much more, and we have in this project. Next slide. So one of the comments really was about trying to figure out ways to group windows together that again are much more clarifying about the residential use of this building. We think the massing, the verticality of the windows, and several other things are great, sort of indicators of that, but also the fact that we are now grouping windows on the right-hand side, you can see both upper and lower, into living room groupings, bedroom groupings, things like that, things which we think will distinguish it a little bit more from its commercial neighbors. Next slide. And then we'll just end on a couple of overview images. This is the image looking just from the southeast of the building towards on Dot Ave, towards both the senior affordable mid-rise and then beyond it, the residential tower. Next slide. This is looking north along Ellery as someone's traveling north along Ellery with the east open space to the right. You can see the two wings of the building, kind of playing off one another in terms of materiality and in terms of form. Next slide. And we'll leave you with this, which is an image from the east open space looking at both sides of our project here. On the right is the senior affordable housing. This is a view looking to the north. This is our south elevation here, and on the left-hand side, the residential tower. So I'll leave it at that if there are any questions.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Mark. Commissioners, comments? You can just use your raised hand. That would be fantastic. David Haseen.
I'll be very brief. I thank you so much for the presentation. I was part of the subcommittee meeting, and I think that you've responded very much to the key discussion points from that meeting. And in particular, I want to thank you for some of the adjustments that you made to the facade, which I think really do describe the building as more residential in character. And I think it's a very handsome project. And I completely embrace the green identity of as a, given the conversation we were just having, as a color of Boston. And so I just wanted to say thank you for listening.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, David. So David, Laura, and Catherine were all at the subcommittee, as well as Jonathan. So Jonathan, welcome your comments as well. Laura?
I will repeat what David said in the sense that I really appreciate the response in such a short amount of time. Seems like yesterday we were all talking. So the only thing that I'll make comment on is I think that there is still room for improvement on the east side where the steps are. I think what you've done has been a big improvement in terms of how the ramps are working. But in urban spaces, landscapes that are kind of cut into smaller pieces have a lot of work to do. And I think that looking a little more at scale of those steps might help that a little bit. But I think I think you've been so responsive, and I appreciate that. That's all.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Laura. Catherine?
Good evening. Thank you. On, particularly in the senior porch area. I think the design work, and thank you for taking the feedback and applying it and adjusting accordingly. Feels a little bit more semi-private, a little bit more distinctive from the other areas. So you won't get many complaints, I don't think. With that, I think in terms of what Commissioner Solano is suggesting, that the steps might need some more work as well. To me, there might be too many, but that's the only comment that I have, but just kudos on all the other adjustments.
Thank you. Catherine.
Thanks.
Thank you, Catherine. Jonathan, I saw your hand.
Yeah,
And
I mean, great project. Appreciate the responsiveness. Again, I think to echo David, I think I appreciate the sort of bold form, the sort of clear green color. I think the window adjustments are minor but are important. So I excited to see what this one goes. Great project.
thanks, Jonathan. Any other comments from commissioners? David Manfredi.
I'm unfortunately missed the subcommittee, but I did see this at full commission, and I'm gathering that I missed important conversation about the front porch. I'm still worried about the front porch, and probably more in the context of Dot Ave, all the way up and down from the very top at Broadway down to the EA station, the Andrews station. Thank you. And kind of the continuity, and I'm not looking to create the great retail food and beverage boulevard, but I am looking to make sure that there's enough activity, there's enough engagement with pedestrians just on the sidewalk. And I know the challenges of the elevation change and some of the challenges because of the diversity of users of this space. But I do wonder, and maybe it's more to think in your next building, in your next Dot Ave building, how we make these spaces that are separated from the street and the sidewalk really engaging to pedestrians. Dot Ave's a really hard street. The development on the other side, on the east side, has been, I don't know, sort of irregular. There's not a great deal of continuity there, but that's not to say that we should say it's okay. It's becoming a more and more important corridor because of its relationship to the Red Line. And I guess maybe I would just urge us to think hard about how all of these buildings, your next building to the south, and your future buildings to the north, and all of the buildings along this side, which are going to evolve between Andrews and Broadway over the next few years, how they meet the ground and how they support active uses that make it just a friendly street to walk.
David, if it's any solace, the corner of Alger and Dot Ave is the lowest point along Dot Ave here. So this is right where our community
highest
is on this. This is the worst it will be at this particular moment, right? So we think it works much better even on the southern end of our building, and will be even better over at 505.
I think
I
I will also say, David, I think there's been an interesting balance that we've been trying to hit, and I think you'll see it in the next presentation. So when we get to the other buildings, right, the balance between Dot Ave and Ellery and the emphasis on where the retail is and where the pedestrian. So I look forward to being able to, we had to sort of push this one a little faster, but show you the full campus of the open space and the ground plane next time we meet. So you can sort of see how we're trying to balance that. But I look forward to the committee's continued comment, particularly as you say on 505 Dot Ave, which is much closer to being level with Dot Ave, and how that transition is a little different than here at 495. So I think it's a good comment. I think it's a balance we're struggling with a little bit. I'll put it that way.
And Mark, I appreciate the aspirations for Ellery, and I know that well, I hope that can be a really good street. But to get me off of Dot Ave as a pedestrian, you're going to have to work hard to get me to Ellery, and so I think the corners are important, and so we should just be mindful of it all the way up and down the street.
Agreed, and as I said, I think this is going to move forward hopefully tonight, but we're going to look at all of the campus in our next subcommittee collectively. So I think we can absolutely talk about how the complete ground plane of phase one as a whole works, and if we need to make some tweaks on the first floor of 495, we still have that opportunity at the retail level. So I don't want to pretend that it's sort of an all or nothing conversation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
David, thank you for your comments. I also remain concerned about the front porch. I think that this team will be able to kind of come to a better conclusion on that. I think there's been a lot of improvement even from when we saw it earlier in December to now, and I appreciate all of that work as other commissioners have responded. And just a couple of thoughts. The front porch to me, so that's going to get your morning light, if I've got my geography correct, and could be a really lovely kind of perch, particular for your senior community. And I wonder if you can just think about, the fact that we have both a vertical and a horizontal separation from Dot Ave, as David talked about, and actually making that transition, particularly the vertical transition, less perceivable. And I'm thinking, for instance, about a careful look at the depth of the treads, for instance, and having that journey, that vertical journey, be easier, particularly given who you're servicing there with your senior population, and that those smaller ideas can help, I think, to lessen that vertical climb, because when you see those renderings, it really does feel like there's a big separation, and can there be a way of blurring those in a little better way? Another comment, if you can go to slide 6, I think just one beyond this. Yes. So if I'm understanding right, the mural wall will actually be blocking kind of that lovely slice of southern exposure. I just want to make sure that what's on the other side, which I think also has some elevation change, isn't in so much shadow that it kind of negates the beauty of having a mural there. So I'd love for you all to look at that again, and appreciate your comment at the beginning of the presentation that we'll have a chance in the other phase one subcommittee conversations to talk more about open space, and that there can be some movement there. So thank you for that. Christina, do we have any public comment?
None that I'm aware of. Are there folks present who would like to make comment? I see no hands raised at this time.
Okay, thank you, Christina. So commissioners, we have a little bit of a complex approvals process tonight. We're looking at this one project in specific, 495 Dot Ave. We'll be looking at the remaining 3 buildings and their open space, as well as the full site open space during subcommittees coming up in the next couple of months. So for 495, which is the project that we just reviewed, do we have a motion?
I can make a stab at it. I make a motion to approve, noting the comments about the public realm and front porch on the project, and having BPDA staff follow up with the proponent on not just this project, but the other projects that are part of this system to create a comprehensive and welcoming streetscape, despite the various conditions that exist there. Or something along
David.
those lines.
Thanks, David. Christina, were you able to get that motion?
Yes, I believe
Okay.
so. Do you need
Do
it read back?
Well, I'll see if there are any additions to David's motion.
Do
before
we need
ask
any
for a
public
second.
comments, Linda?
We did ask for public comment and there were
Oh,
none.
and there
Bill.
weren't any. I
Thank
apologize.
you. No problem. Any amendments to David Haseen's motion before we ask for a second? All right, I don't see any. Do we have a second?
Second.
Great, and I will go through our list. All in favor, please say yes. Catherine Morris,
Yes.
Jonathan Evans,
Yes.
David Haseen,
Yes.
David Manfredi, Bill Ron,
Yes.
Laura Solano,
Yes.
and Anne Marie Lubenow.
Yes.
And myself, yes. Congratulations.
Thank you. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Thank you very much.
Sounds great. And with that, we're ready to move on to 135 Morrissey, and I think that Mimi will come back in at this point.
Excuse me, Linda, I am recused and I'll be back in whatever, at 6:15, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Christine, I think we're ready to have the proponent begin.
Great. Just a note to the proponent team that will be a 10-minute limit on the presentation. We'll give a 5, 2, and 30-second warning.
And actually, before this proponent starts, there is one staff slide to speak to provisos that the subcommittee had put on this project while moving it to full committee. And I'll turn it over to Elizabeth.
Hi, Elizabeth Stifel, BPDA Senior Architect and Urban Designer. I've taken over this project from my colleague Matt Martin and my former colleague Matt Martin. Wanted to bring you up to date. At the last design committee, the commissioners present had some stipulations that they wanted to see covered before the project came for a vote. And those were additional development of the courtyard, including the paving, study of removing the upper level bridge, another look at the materiality of the building, particularly for the center section, and then finally for looking at how the landscape of the design meets the building on all sides. And those updates were sent to the commission last week.
Elizabeth, it's so nice to see you again.
All right, can we begin?
Yes, yes, yes. Sorry,
Okay.
there's a transition here and I was trying to figure out where we are, but please go ahead and present.
Thank you. Good evening and thank you for your time. I'm Christine Song from Elkis Manfredi Architects. I'm joined by Genevieve Dominiak and Tracy Shriver from our office, as well as Chris Jones for landscape architecture from Arcadis. Also here this evening is Beacon Capital Partners, the owner and proponent of this project. We had our first BCDC meeting in July and design committee in October. These discussions, along with feedback from BPDA staff, have informed the significant improvements we've made to the project. We debuted a new design at the October design committee. It is lower in height, has less square footage, and less parking than the original design. You may recall the original massing was L-shaped with rounded corners. At the July BCDC meeting, David Haseen pointed out that the former Globe building, with its architectural language of an accumulation of parts over time, is important context that the proposed building should address. In response, we've completely reconceived the building massing. It consists of 2 linear geometries connected by a third volume in the middle. The first volume to the north is 60 feet wide and is oriented to the existing building and Morrissey Boulevard. The second volume to the south is 90 feet wide and faces the neighborhood and I-93. Connecting these two geometries is a wedge-shaped volume that houses the building's core and accessible terraces. We also took a floor off the building and went from 6 levels with 15-foot floor-to-floors to 5 levels with 17-foot floor-to-floors. We think that Southline will have a mix of science and technology tenants, including robotics and other kinds of mechanical technologies, in addition to life science. The new leasing depths of 60 feet and 90 feet and taller floor-to-floor at 17 feet will accommodate a diverse range of technology tenants. This new massing strategy is driven by internal programming for distinct uses within the building. And just like the former Globe building, its form emphasizes an architectural language of a building composed of several parts. So at the July BCDC meeting, Linda Eastley noted that the site lacked a connection to the surrounding urban fabric and felt more like a suburban development. In response, we've made the following improvements to the site plan. First, we eliminated the perpendicular parking that exists on both sides of this access drive and replaced it with something that looks and works more like an urban street with parallel parking, sidewalks, and street trees. Next, in the zone between the existing and proposed building, there will be a curbless street that will accommodate vehicular drop-off for the existing building, but also for this plaza area to be easily closed off for the cars and programmed for events. And finally, the parking field to the south is significantly greener with the incorporation of wide strips of landscaping, creating the opportunity for more trees and reducing the heat island effect. This view of the proposed 5-story building, this is a view of the 5-story building as one approaches from Morrissey. The proposed building entrance is on axis with the sidewalk leading to Morrissey. Everything to the right of this existing multi-use path has been reconfigured. The proposed parallel parking, narrower travel lanes, sidewalks, and street trees on both sides of this access drive help integrate the development into the fabric of the city. There is now pedestrian access on both sides of the street for an enhanced arrival experience and improved pedestrian access for Morrissey. This site has been industrial for so long, even with recent transformations taking place. We drew inspiration from the material palette of the former Globe building so that the new building would express the manufacturing past of the site and complement the surrounding urban fabric. At the July BCDC meeting, Kirk Sykes encouraged the design team to explore a two-faced building that presented differently from different orientations as a way to tie into the site, into the character of the site. The north volume is closest to the former Globe building. It is clad in red iron spot brick with a change in brick coursing at the spandrel area for a subtle variation of color and texture. The volume to the south has industrial sash windows. Aluminum curtain wall members are profiled to resemble steel shapes and lateral bracing. And finally, the volume in the middle is a charcoal gray metal panel with extruded frames to lend scale. This view on the left shows all 3 parts of the proposed building from Patton's Cove. The volume clad in brick faces the existing building, and the volume to the south faces the Savin Hill neighborhood. The view on the right looks into the plaza between the 2 buildings. This plaza is curbless and allows the space to function as a forecourt for both buildings. Note the bridge that connects the second floors of both buildings. Existing tenants in the former Globe building have expressed strong interest in expanding into the proposed building via an elevated tenant connector. And so we believe that this bridge is critical to leasing this new building as quickly as possible. To be clear, the bridge will only be built when it becomes the functional necessity of a tenant that wants to be on both sides of the bridge. And we expect the majority of tenants to cross the plaza at street level.
Just over halfway.
As you can see from the key plan, we are standing at the end of Seaview Terrace, looking at the elevation that faces the neighborhood. The green of Patton's Cove is reflected in the color of the building facade and in the accessible terraces that face the cove. As mentioned earlier, wide strips of landscaping to the south of the site allows for many more trees to be planted, which further extends the natural ecosystem of the cove into the site. All three facades are visible from I-93. In the volume to the north, the screen wall at Mechanical Penthouse is stepped back 5 to 10 feet from the building perimeter. To the south, the building envelope extends beyond the roof to screen the mechanical equipment. The middle volume has no screen wall at the roof. The diversity and height of each volume reinforces the idea of separate parts. The footprint of the proposed building sits to the south of the former Globe building. Between them is the plaza. Pedestrians coming from the neighborhood access the site via Wave Ave. From here, they have the option of traveling around the edges of Patton's Cove on the multi-use path, or walking along the new sidewalk that traces the south edge of both buildings to Morrissey, or connecting through this plaza and the Great Hall in the existing building to the JFK UMass MBTA station beyond. The plaza itself is surrounded by active uses, including the lobby of the proposed building, the Mass Bio Teaching Lab, fitness, and a food truck. And now Chris Jones will walk us through the landscape strategy.
Thanks, Christine, and thanks, everybody. I think you heard from the introduction and from Christine as well that a major part of our updates were really focused on this pedestrian court, making it more green, making it more visually clear as to its purpose as a shared courtyard between the two buildings. I think, Linda, you also mentioned in our previous discussion the sense that the new building felt a bit like an island unto itself, separated from the existing building. And so we made a clear and conscious effort to basically reach around the building and create a pedestrian treatment to the entirety of the perimeter, such that it feels it's a part of the entire courtyard and adjacency to the existing building. Our materiality of the space is thought to be a mix of colored concretes that create a sort of a sense of pedestrian scale, but also have a durability that is needed.
2-minute warning.
Thank you. Other elements that were touched on is the greening of the parking lot so that it can function as a rain garden element for stormwater collection. And I know you've all seen before our amenity spaces that are pocketed into the breaks where the building occurs. And those are thought to be areas for landscape performance through rain gardens and pollinator gardens. And at the next slide, briefly, an enlargement showing the materiality of the elements, the colored concrete, unit pavers, stamped asphalt. And then lastly, as we've always approached this as an opportunity because of the relative youth of the existing trees, that we could take the existing trees within the parking lot and construction area and transplant them to the perimeter, really resulting in no net loss of existing vegetation and a significant gain throughout the entire site of additional caliper inch. So the pink represents transplanted trees, and then the infill of green, blue, and orange and purple represent new vegetation trees. And I'll stop.
Thank you. Thank you. Commissioners, I'll just remind you, I think you heard your names called out, but just as a reminder, Linda Eastley, Kirk Sykes, and Anne-Marie Lubenow were at the last design meeting. So welcome all comments, starting with those that attended the last meeting.
Well, I'll jump in. We've seen this evolution. This is Commissioner Sykes. We've seen the evolution of this project over the last 6 months or so, and I think from where it started, it has come a long way. And I think the simplification and the identity of the individual building components, as well as the massings and the expression, has greatly improved over time, along with the connectivity to the ground plane and the approaches that you put forth in the landscape. So I'm very complimentary of I feel, what you've done over the last few months to make the project fit with the existing project and the surrounding area.
Thanks, Kirk. Let me pass it on to Linda Easley.
Thanks, Mimi. I wanted to compliment Christine and Chris. I think this is one of the more difficult projects that we've seen because it's so far removed from its parent street from Morrissey, and is behind another building and going to be very difficult to navigate. And I think that you've done a terrific job in kind of integrating comments and making this project so much better and more legible. The simplification that you shared today really certainly resonates with me. I think particularly, Christine, just looking at the way that you've been able to articulate what I'm going to call the wedge building, which I think is building number 2 from when we saw it last, maybe in December. Yes, makes a big difference for me today. Just a couple of comments. The first is, since we don't know the future of the Boston Globe building, I appreciate you thinking about the urban realm as much as you have, and what kind of partner buildings might look like in the future and how they can build on the structure and the patterns that you're developing in this project, I think are really important. And then the second and last comment that I'll make, we have seen this project and another one back at the end of last year come in with bridge proposals. And I just wanted to kind of talk about that and lend my perspective. When we have a project like this that that has a building that's nearby and has such a great public realm, and Chris, compliments to you for really creating a plaza that feels welcoming and comfortable. I worry about taking the energy off of that ground plane, off of the real urban realm. And so I just wanted to kind of go on record to say that, these two projects are very close to one another. We have the opportunity to energize that public realm in the plaza between the two buildings, regardless of whether a tenant would occupy one or both sides. But thank you for all of the improvements today.
Thanks, Linda. David Hassin.
Thank you. I didn't know if all the commissioners who've been part of the subcommittee had spoken, but I haven't seen this project since the last version, and I think that I very much appreciate what you've done to reimagine this whole area as a complex of smaller parts, which is very much the grain of how it feels today. Basically, a kind of, in a sense, an old New England factory complex, but in this case of print instead of what we're accustomed to in other parts of New England. It is maybe, Linda, for that reason that I'm actually okay with the bridge in this particular, for that use, if it's a real contingency for tenanting a building at this challenging time, because of where it is, and also because their new massing strategy feels so much like, in a sense, an old mill complex that has all of these links and elements connecting them. To that end, I think that the way you've designed it, it appears almost like it's something that you would disappear, is intended to disappear. And I wonder, if you are going to create a bridge there, if it shouldn't be actually much more dynamic and architectural, like the dark building is, and in a sense more emphatically industrial as a connector in the future, that maybe also offers a kind of covered walkway on the lower level so that people are encouraged to connect to the building, on multiple levels. The other comment I'd say is that this will be an important building to see as you're coming into the city on 93 on the inbound lanes, and I think you have a view of that. I'm still upset about the BU garage, building for not doing something more theatrical as you come into the city with lighting and art and so forth. And I think there's an opportunity with the dynamic of the facade that you're creating here to really, is particularly with lighting and or shade and shadow, to create a kind of a dynamic sense of entry coming into the Boston urban megaplex here. So I hope that that becomes part of the image of this project, is something that looks good by day and also by night. Other than that, I think that you know, the devil is in the details with a building like this, just making sure that you know, some of your brick precedent imagery were very, very beautiful because of really the layering of detail and so forth. I hope that's what's ultimately intended, certainly for the brick part of the building. But I think this is a great evolution to the design, and thank you for taking it so seriously in terms of rethinking it.
Thanks, David. Laura Solano?
Could we go back to the site plan? I must have missed this detail. And by the way, I have not seen this project before, so I have a few clarifying questions. The first is the purpose of that road that goes between the buildings for service, emergency, or something else?
You mean the plaza? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, so the existing building in gray has a drop-off area, and that drop-off is what we're preserving, limited vehicular access in that pink area for the plaza. And that drop-off is for the existing building.
Got it. And then first I'll say that the partitioning of the building, I think, is really successful. And in doing so, I think you've allowed yourself to have more integration with the landscape, in particular the parking lot, certainly from the perspectives, makes the project look much more immersed from the highway, certainly, and also from the adjacent buildings. So I appreciate the downscaling of that and the greening up of that. But the other spaces I'm a bit concerned about, because of course that road, you're at that at crossroads of needing it to operate like a road, but not look like a road. And I don't know whether the scale can be changed at all, but there's something about that particularly in the perspective view from Patton's Cove, that doesn't do anything to diminish it from looking just like it is. And in terms of how people use the outdoor space, what are the areas that are imagined to be places where people congregate?
Chris, do you want to take that?
Yeah, can you go to maybe you can go to the enlarged site plan. Both of the buildings are elevated, so there's I'll call it a porch on the existing building, and then there is also a front porch on the proposed building. Those obviously, you know, have a lot of benefits in that they allow people to sit at the edges and look down on space and offer separation. I think the width, there's two parts to this that are creating some of that visual width. There's obviously the required 20-foot wide fire lane, one-way circulation, but there's also a little pull-off zone that's in front of the porch that's on the existing building, and then a safe pedestrian zone between that wall line and the edge of the drop lane.
So Dan, quick question. So the north is up relatively, is that right?
Yeah, relatively.
So on the west side of the building, the width of that road is 20 feet, and the one that you were talking about next to the porches is larger than 20 feet because of a pull-off
For a
zone, is
pull-up
that
zone,
correct?
that's correct, yeah. So it gets wider at
Yeah.
the porch, but it's pinched down at the new building's porch steps come out. You can see it's sort of pinched down to road width. And it's that same dimension. You can kind of follow the bollards around. And you can see, I think to your question, we envision that there's opportunities for gathering along the pedestrian zone, sort of daily use gathering under the trees that you see to the north side. We see that filled with tables and chairs. The food truck is the existing Boston Globe food truck that's parked there today, has found sort of a shifted new home adjacent to a usable green space and an overlook to a rain garden space, which you see in sort of thank you. And then everything beyond that line is really existing, that white wall that defines the porch and the rise to the existing buildings right there. There is some existing vegetation in that pocketed angle where the sort of the old rail lines would be preserved. So there's a lot of little details that are hard to pick up. There's some fixed seating benches within that space as well. And then we were trying to suggest a detailing of the material to make it feel more pedestrian and really limit the amount of sense of cars just passing through here and instead taking the loop around the building.
Yeah, and I think I might study some paving that maybe helps with the scale, stepping up the scale, particularly of the wide space, right, where you can start to feel like there are different zones. But I also think that if you look at the perspective, if you don't mind going from there, it's pretty tough, right? There's the sense you get here with, I think, one of the next perspectives. That one, go back. Oops. Next one, next. It's the view that looks down, almost. Okay, stop. So the one on the right-hand side, that's a pretty tough view. And it's hard to see how that might be inviting for either building. And I would suggest that you restudy the presence of green in that space, of hard space to soft space. Particularly since you're looking out and connecting to, such a terrific natural feature. That just, it feels really tough to me and quite different from the other moves that you're making in the rest of the building. The other is, you use the terms pollinator garden and I think rain garden. And I would encourage you to think about the whole site as a pollinator garden, if you will, because pollinator garden can really get taken out of context, right? Because the scale that's really needed to make both of those operational, I think, is greater than what you're showing. And so if you could step up the scale of that in other spaces by providing plants or other kind of habitat enhancements that will encourage more of an immersion of both of those, the rain garden and the pollinator garden, to be site-wide as opposed to space specific, which they want to be anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good comment.
So I guess that, if I have any, I'm going to say criticisms, but I'll change it to please, PLEA. It would be to study this view and see if what you can do given the tough circumstances that you have with either, you have opportunities of topography, you have opportunities to maybe add a lot more green in this space. I think that the front porch would be a good sacrifice, or at least the scale of it to improve that condition. So I'll leave it at there, but thank you. And the changes that you've made over time, obviously are really terrific. So I'm hopeful about the future of these improvements we've been talking about.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks.
I'm not seeing any other commissioners raising their Zoom hand, so maybe I'll just chime in and say this project, you know, has really transformed since I last saw it. I saw it, you know, at the monthly meeting quite a while ago, and it's really taken on a whole different character, which I truly appreciate. And I'll just say two things in the interest of time. One, appreciate the massing strategies, you looking at the context of the Boston Globe building and taking hints of the architecture and applying it to these new buildings. I think that's really effective, and appreciate the penthouse strategies to help conceal them and breaking up the massing as you have. There's only one comment that I want to go back to slide 5, I believe, which is at Entry Street, which is really dramatically improved, as modest as it is as an entry road. I'm going to say modest because it's not an actual street, but it has qualities of the street. And I think one thing to improve on is layering, perhaps even street lighting to make it feel more like a street. And thinking about like this landscape zone not really being paved, you know, or mowed grass. I don't think that really helps the character of a street, an urban condition. But I do appreciate all of the rethinking that you have done. It's been very thoughtful. I still don't see any commissioners' hands raised, so I think with that we can open up for public comment.
At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance that may wish to contribute public testimony. Please raise your digital hand using the instructions presented on the screen. I see one raised hand, Mr. Walkman.
Hi there, Jake Walkman here, resident of Savin Hill. We looked at this at the Civic Association. I guess I'm warming up to the materials and the accumulation of parts. You know, I still think it's maybe a little contrived to have your accumulation of parts happen all at once, but I agree it is better. But you know, fundamentally, I think my biggest issue is that it still does feel like a suburban development because it isn't near where all the walking paths are or closer to JFK Station. Reading between the lines, maybe those towers will be built next. I guess given the constraint that we're building this, my biggest issue is that a curbless street seems to be the worst of both worlds, since it's not clear who has the right of way. And when we brought this up at the Civic Association, the reasoning was that, you know, hey, we do this in Europe. I'd argue that in Europe, there's big relevant differences between the size of car and how fast they move. So curbless street just seems like kind of you're asking for trouble, since it's not clear if the pedestrian or the car has the right of way under normal circumstances. With that all said, I would say we probably should not approve this until Commissioner Solano's items are addressed, and maybe that can go hand in hand with greening the space as well. And that's it.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public interested in testifying? Commissioner Ron, I see your hand raised.
Bill, you're muted.
I'm unmuted. I apologize. Let me just compliment the team on the elevational character of the main building. I just think it's a very handsome building, and no one today really talked about that issue. And so that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Bill. So commissioners, we need a motion for this project. Mm-hmm.
I'll put forward a motion that I would suppose, with all of the suggestions that have been made about the improvements of the plaza, the procession to the building, and further enhancement of maybe some of the finer grain aspects with staff, that we approve this project. So.
Mimi, I wanted to just add maybe one proviso, because I think that Laura's comments are really good ones. And I'd love for BPDA staff to work closely with this proponent to think about the plaza itself, not only the greening, which I think, Laura, was your term, but also just thinking about the component parts, how you would drive through to the point of our public comment, and also how you would kind of be there as a social space and walk between the buildings as well. I think that part could be improved, and I'd love to have it ride with our vote tonight.
So can I modify my motion to have robust further enhancement of the character of the plaza, the procession, and how it interacts with the surrounding neighborhoods and paths, et cetera, as mentioned, as well as I want to add Linda's comments about further exploration of the bridge to encourage activity on the ground plane and protection in a way that it's preferential to being present internally to the space.
So Kirk,
Long motion.
I'm gonna let you tighten that motion up while we listen to Anne Marie's comments,
Oh,
because
I'm
she has her
sorry,
hand
Emery,
raised.
I didn't see you. I apologize.
No, that's good.
That's okay. I had a similar comment. I guess two-part. One is appreciate the breakdown of the massing, but just as the design evolves, if there can be a way to look at integrating the building, just sort of think about the materials, the use of materials as a way of both integrating the three components of the new building along with the landscape. I think that would help to address, I agree actually with the public comment that it still feels very suburban to me. And I think if there could be more attention to the finer details, and that can be resolved as the design evolves. And then also coming back to the concern about the bridge, I too shared that concern. I appreciated Commissioner Haseen's comment about the industrial nature of the building. So I think the use of that bridge, or the I guess the permission of that bridge, really needs to be subject to the, I guess, the requirements of the leasing of the building. I'm not sure quite how to word that, but I agree that the ground plane needs to be addressed to confirm that that public space works in terms of both safety and encouragement of use of the space, and that an elevated bridge should only be constructed if all other means have been, approached or addressed. If all other means have been attempted is the word I'm looking for. I hope that makes sense.
I'm hearing three issues. One is further refinement of the plaza with greening of the plaza. I'm hearing materials on the building to continue to evolve and work with PDA staff on refining them and spilling those materials into the plaza. And thirdly, hearing concerns about the bridge and the character of its current design.
If I could add one, which is I agree with the public comment about needing to at least re-examine the curbless street. I think that's a strong comment. And in addition to, I can't remember if it was Linda or you, Mimi, who talked about the lights, et cetera. So it's really, I guess, re-examining the urban character of that corridor, and then maybe same thing with the others, right? With the other street that goes through it. And is there a correlation between those or a distinction between them? That wasn't very nice of me to.
No, I think that's
on.
fine. It's starting to become a hefty motion, and I think we need to think as a commission if this is if there's enough clarity to pass on to the BPDA staff. And so I'm going to ask for one more motion.
I think we might have lost Kirk.
No, I'm here.
Oh, there you are, Kirk. You disappeared off the screen.
I'm happy to take another shot at it, or another commissioner can try, but let me start it and see if I can get there. I recommend approval provisoed on further working with staff on the texture of the plaza, the building materials, evolution, further exploration of the bridge, and integration into the circulation with the surrounding neighborhood with greater enhancement and activation. Anyone else want to modify that?
I would like to just add that the project come back for an informal review to this commission once those refinements have been made.
Agreed.
And I would second that motion.
Great. So we have a motion, and I hope Lizzie or Christina recorded that.
Yep.
So with that, I am going to call every commissioner that's present. Linda Easley,
Yes.
Jonathan Evans,
Yes.
David Hassan,
Yes, with provisos. No, just kidding.
Anne Marie Lubenow,
Yes.
Catherine Morris,
Yes.
Bill Ron,
Yes.
Laura Solano,
Yes.
Kirk Sykes,
Yes.
and myself, Mimi Love. I think there is some work to do, but we've given you a clear roadmap, and looking forward to seeing it again, but you are approved.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. So moving on to 103 North Beacon Street. I think right, David Manfredi is still recused. Okay, I think we're ready to go.
I'm also recused on this one, sorry.
Okay, thanks, Kirk.
I would just like to let the proponent team know that we'll be setting a 10-minute timer for the presentation and issue of 5 2-minute warnings and a 30-second warning following a brief comment from BPDA staff member Seth Reisman.
Thank you, Christina. My name is Seth Reisman, Deputy Director for Design Review at the BPDA. I wanted to provide some context to the commissioners regarding a BPDA-directed change to this project that happened within the last week, although the project has undergone process for the last 8 months. In further reviewing the project in the context of the Guest Street study, which page of which you see before you here, we determined that the previous height and massing was just a step too far above what was allowed in the Guest Street study. And so we just last week directed the proponent to bring the project into greater conformity with the Guest Street study, specifically on height and density. And you see the critical corridor here of North Beacon Street, intersection with Arthur Street, which leads ultimately to the T station along the highway, and the site's role at that intersection. But the overall vision for this area was a step down in height and density from along the highway to meet the lower scale of the existing neighborhood. And so if you can go next, please. You'll see here the site circled on the right-hand side in comparison to some recent buildings in green that have been improved in this corridor, as well as the height limits, zoning height limits for this idea of stepping down from 150 to 110 to 40 along North Beacon Street. And in reviewing the project, we asked the proponent to come more in alignment with a project that was previously proposed last year, a few blocks up the street, you see on the left-hand side of the screen, with heights that are closer in alignment to the study heights, as well as this general idea of stepping back from North Beacon and up towards the rail and highway. And so with that, the team has worked very hard over the last week to adjust their scheme to that, while maintaining the overall design ethos that you all have seen to date. Thank you.
Thanks, Seth. And I incorrectly said that Commissioner Manfredi was recused from this one, but he is back with us, and Kirk Sykes is not with us. So proponent team, whenever you're ready. Looks like Phil, you're presenting.
Yes, great. Thanks and thanks, Seth. I appreciate all the work with BPD staff on this. I think a lot of these comments have been well received, and it really enhanced and improved the scheme we're going to show you today. So let's dive in here. So on the screen here, you can see the prior massing that everybody had seen in the last subcommittee meeting, and then the evolved scheme based on the BPA design requests. And really those revolved around building height, as Seth mentioned. You can see in the Bolden scheme or text there, the 92 foot to the highest occupied floor, we essentially removed a floor from the building, and then 122 feet to the top of the mechanical penthouse. So overall, a 32 foot height reduction in the building is what we accommodated. You can see as part of the massing, again, keeping with the design intent and that design ethos we had showed you prior, the idea of the stepping form down to the scale of North Beacon Street, the idea of a building setback along Arthur Street that maintains that setback, and then the idea of really that layered building mechanical penthouse that was successful last time. We'll show you that in rendered form. So a perspective view of the updated design. And again, here's where you really feel that lowered height, the idea of this long linearity of that building typology, the industrial building typology that's typical to this neighborhood, and really starting to understand the rigor and the repetition of those bays. Again, maintaining that contemporary industrial design language, the idea of these bold industrial windows, and then these frames that work their way around it. Again, that stepping form that makes its way down North Beacon Street. And then the idea of really eroding these corners, lightening up that massing with these frames that continue, but the idea of seeing sky brightness, not only through the step form, but really at that building penthouse as well. You can see we've extended those sort of industrial frames up. And the idea that you can see this sort of layered, stepped back mechanical penthouse behind it, really giving that layered effect, I think lightening the top of the building, and also really working on those visual sight lines from the pedestrian perspective. And then in the new scheme, similarly maintaining a very active public realm in the building edge, the idea of active uses and entry fronts all along North Beacon, then all the way down Arthur Street, really permeated in the middle by a mid-block building that gives that pedestrian sequence. And then you can see the scheme here on the left, really looking at North Beacon Street straight on. The idea of, again, that cascading stepping form coming down to the street edge, the idea of the erosion of those corners and those forms making their way through, the sky brightness, the idea of potentially greenery on those stepped landscapes, still being able to maintain that. And then you can see the mechanical penthouse beyond that, again, with that layered approach with the screen wall set behind the building frame, the idea of the sky brightness making its way through and really lightening, we think, the impact of that mechanical. At the bottom right, you can see an updated view. This is North Beacon Street looking east back towards Boston. Again, that stepped form, and then sort of that rigor of that repetition of the industrial language back. And then finally in the upper right, this is a view looking Arthur Street back towards North Beacon, essentially down Hitchborn Street there. And the idea of that setback at the third story along Arthur, but again, that linearity, we think of in a lot of ways, the improved aesthetic of that industrial heritage. Again, the openings at the top for that layered penthouse approach, and then a more rectilinear mass on the Hitchborn side, recognizing that I think the Guest Street planning study that Seth was articulating earlier allows for that, and that differentiation of the context at Hitchborn versus North Street. Next up, we look at the public realm. So this is the prior ground floor plan that we had showed you previously to the BPDA requests. You can see the building was faceted back, the idea of a continuous active street edge along North Beacon and around Arthur Street, facilitating that pedestrian movement north to the transit site. And then our updated ground plan here with the landscape showing. You can see again, maintaining full active frontage along North Beacon and along Arthur Street here with building entries throughout there. The idea that those active spaces, whether retail or building amenity or those flex spaces, can spill out onto the public realm, whether it's seating and entryways here. The southern face of the building, in order to accommodate some of those height requests, got a little bit closer to North Beacon Street. And in many ways, we think actually this responds to a few of the comments about maintaining the urban street wall along North Beacon Street. The building was set a little farther back before, but we think this holds that street wall better, continually the context of what North Beacon is and how that evolution of that neighborhood may make its way there. All the while still maintaining very generous dimensions. You can see at the western end over 20 feet between curb and building face, and then at the eastern end over 25 feet. Still maintaining that sort of building facet, we'll call it, in plan that allows for alignment with a crosswalk across Arthur Street, and then facilitates that pedestrian movement, sort of that gesture of a gateway site, the idea of pedestrians moving down Arthur towards transit. As you make your way down Arthur, looking at a 15-foot dimension from curb edge to building face. Again, in the mid-block, that relief, the setback for the building lobby there, and then making your way down to almost a 30-foot curb to building dimension at the corner of Arthur and Hitchborn Street. Along North Beacon Street from a landscape perspective, still very conceptual, but the idea of, you know, a landscaped edge and trees, but still very much a legible walking area. And again, enough depth to have seating that's comfortable and not within that walking zone along North Beacon. Again, on Arthur Street, a very legible walkable 9-foot walking piece. And then at that 30-foot dimension, the idea of some separate seating that could really function separately from that, up against the active use of the building.
Just over half, Phil.
Okay. Hitchborn Street, again, street trees lining that street, as well as street trees along Herring Street for the urban context. And then just some pedestrian views for everybody, just to kind of understand the scale and the depth here. This is looking east down North Beacon Street to the front of the building. The idea of that very active frontage with entries, you start to feel the scale and the proportion of that. The idea of the bike lane, the idea of some landscape buffer and trees. Again, that generous dimension for walking, and then the idea of seating and that dimensionality for potentially cafe seating or spill out from those active spaces. Then as you turn the corner, the idea of walking down Arthur Street here, again, the bike lane continuing, our green strip and in trees is part of that. And then that very legible walking space going down towards transit past the 103 lobby in the mid-block here. This is a view looking at Arthur, really mid-block at that lobby, this multi-story reading sort of punctuating the block on either side with these active spaces at the ground level, just giving that level of relief and scale at the public realm, all the while kind of maintaining that industrial aesthetic. And then finally looking down Arthur Street back towards North Beacon Street, you start to feel that generous 30-foot proportion, the idea of a very legible walking path towards transit, but then that very separate and distinct area for seating, spill out for those amenity spaces and those active uses along the building edge. And then you can see the trees aligning down Hitchborn to the right there. And that's the summary of our presentation. So happy to take questions and comments on our updated scheme.
Thanks, Phil. Commissioners, Bill, Ron.
Yes, I want to comment that between the BPDA and the petitioners, I think there's a lot of improvements to this building, particularly even lowering its height, but also to get away from that series of slants that we saw from the very beginning. And so I thank you, Phil, for taking some of that advice and coming up with something that is lively. These cut-ins at the corner, there's a lot to like about the building. So that's positive. I do have one question. Looking at the site plan, the building edge is not parallel to the street. It's 25 feet on the east and it's 20 feet on the west. And I don't know what that is getting you, but if it is an important distinction, then how does it affect the landscape plan? And maybe we can turn to Laura and others today to just look at that, because again, that slanted edge to North Beacon Street, I just don't know why it's there. And Phil, you might want to say something about that.
Yeah, maybe just quickly to respond to that, Bill, there is a bit of a functional aspect to that where we wanted to bring the building edge back to reveal that crosswalk. We were talking with BPDA staff, we could certainly finesse that number, but that started to create that offset. I think we also thought it allowed for better spill out from the edge of the building and maybe help facilitate that pedestrian. There was very much that functional request of, I think if you can see the 20'6", be right at the edge of the crosswalk. So a bit of that was in discussion.
But I would say you need to have a reason in addition to what you just said. Obviously, exposing crosswalks is important, but there has to be some other rationale, a design rationale to just move away from having a continuous 25-foot setback. And so I encourage other commissioners to weigh in on this question.
Thanks, Bill. David Hassin.
First of all, I want to completely agree with Bill. I wonder if that angle is a vestige of the earlier scheme and maybe something that should be, revisited, because it may seem, to me, it's a question that the BPDA staff can address when they begin to think of the nature of the development and the alignments on either side of that project, whether this is going to read as an anomaly or as part of a continuous street wall. So maybe that's something that can be investigated. The second thing I'd like to say is I really appreciate the changes that have been made here at the behest of the BPDA staff. Guidelines matter. A lot of thinking goes into them. And the fact that, ultimately it'll be about zoning, but the fact that the BPDA staff did look so carefully at the Guest Street study and the consequences that this building would have in terms of maintaining that thinking across the site is, to my mind, very much appreciated. And I think that the lowering of the height and the simplifying of the massing is positive. And I think in general, there's, as Bill said, there's a lot to like about the project. I have one sort of architectural comment that if you could pull up, Phil, the view from, yes, that view, thank you. I think that it's a nice, handsome proportions, nice, clear details. The Guest Street study, of course, is imagining a pretty pronounced setback at the, I guess it's the fourth level there, where you have that sort of porch-like element that is bridging between the high volume and the low volume. And I think that maybe instead of the architecture being so seamless between the high and the low section, if there was an opportunity to think of that element as an element that could potentially be broken down with a different kind of glazing system or something that's still in the spirit of the building, but that emphasizes that setback more, I think it would help in relating this building to the building that we approved down the street and some of the other things that we anticipate coming forward. And in a similar way, if you zoom in on one of the views of your streetscape, I think you have these nice frames that span up and down 3 levels that have this canopy essentially that I think really humanizes the scale. But I question whether the storefront design should just be an extrusion of the glassy curtain wall system that's above it down to the street, or whether it should actually break down, change material, do something that actually humanizes this building as it comes up against a residential neighborhood. That could be, it could be as simple as breaking the system down more, or introducing wood or something. I don't know, but I think that it would be, it would actually make the frame language that you have, I think, richer. It's almost like, but it looks like to me like there's some kind of a material under the canopy there that is different. And I wonder if that somehow rolled into the storefront some, if it might make those tenancies, those restaurants, those retail spaces feel more like they're relating to the scale of humans. Yeah, I think this is a view where that might really be helpful. So in my mind, this is really about refining what looks like a very nice design and good details. But I think that like with just taking your system and your architectural language and adding one more step of detail and refinement to it and applying that in key places will strengthen the both the pedestrian experience and that sense of step down at the neighborhood. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Linda Easley.
Thanks, Mimi. This is a great project. I wondered if if the actual shape of the building had more to do with it trying to be a parallelogram with Hitchborn Street, but that may not be true. I agree that a different expression on North Beacon makes sense. I really like, in fact, this image portrays it, but I really like the idea that there could be some alcoves that could be used to activate the street, particularly if there's retail that supports that with restaurants, et cetera, rather than having a wedge shape on the actual public realm part of it, the sidewalk part. I also had a similar question on North Beacon, and maybe we can go to the site plan for that. So I'm noticing that there's a paving pattern that's being introduced as almost slices that essentially connects the bike lane to the facade. Yes, and I'm just curious about that detail. It looks like in some places that actually correlates with building entries, and in some places it does not. And I think it just wraps into a lot of the conversation that you're hearing already to simplify North Beacon. If it's a place that we want to have gathering, is there a way that we can create these alcoves that also reflect on the actual materiality of the facade and makes that a little bit more prominent, rather than feeling a little more random as I'm kind of looking at it now. Another question that I had, and if we could look at, there was a perspective that showed the main entry on Arthur Street, this one. And I don't think anyone has talked about this. I think that this is a really interesting, bold statement from Arthur Street, and certainly is the main entry to the building. For me, it feels overly complicated, and I just wondered if there were ways that this expression could be simplified as you continue to work with BPDA staff, either in terms of the materiality or actually kind of what you experience from the inside of the building coming to the exterior. But I think it could be a really powerful statement if you are able to simplify. And then the third comment that I had, I think, was on Hitchborn, and we didn't see a lot of that face of the building, right? Just this hint of what's happening. And I wondered if you could just give us a 10-minute recap. It looks like there are some street trees, some bike parking, but I'm not really understanding how that edge of the building is relating to what's across and potentially will happen in the future across the street.
Yeah, I think we were looking at the active edges and along Arthur, turning the corner to about that first third of Hitchborn, really looking at that corner and sort of the diagonal adjacency to the green space that's contemplated as part of that guest street planning study, maintaining that green edge. And then really, at some point as we transition towards Herrick, that's where we get more back of house spaces, simply to try and keep all the active edges, really turning, 3 corners if we can. So it's about a third of the way back in front of those blue bikes. It would be probably that active type space, but really the spill out and entry doorways would be along Arthur, and probably not too many entryways on Hitchborn, just to bias it towards Arthur, where we think all the pedestrian circulation is likely.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear you say that, Phil, because I think, we want to be thinking about Hitchborn as a real street, as a really strong participant in the urban grid there. And so being able to have that strong turn of the corner, and even, down where you've got the Hitchborn furnishing zone and concrete walkway labels, making that as active as possible, I think would be very positive. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. We have lots of hands raised. I think I'm doing this in the right order, but I'm going to go to Laura Solano next.
Thank you. I have a we can stay right here for a moment. I have a question about the North Beacon Street, both the building and the landscape. So the entrances to the buildings and we can go to the perspective in a moment. The entrances to the, it's okay, you can flip to that one because I can ask the question the same way with that perspective. So the entrances to the buildings are or are not where the canopies are on the building?
You know, I think, Laura, this is pretty conceptual right now, and there's flexibility all along that frontage. So I think in the interest of time, we put entries in, and I think we imagine them to be aligned with the canopies once tenanting and leasing happens. So I think that's how we imagine the sort of legibility and identity to happen. I think this rendering is sort of a point in time, we put it that way.
Yeah, and I know that you've done this very quickly, and I think that there are also some conflicts with the landscape that need to be reconciled as well in terms of alignment of things. But I'm going to go, we can stay on this, the pathways, the striping that Linda mentioned, and how those breaks are meant for access from the bike path. Is that it? And there are multiple breaks along the way. Is that the intention?
Yeah, I think they were emphasizing those breaks, Laura, but I think, again, it's fairly conceptual. We're open to how we might emphasize paving patterns and different use patterns in that space.
Well, I would also encourage you to look at the rhythm of those openings and therefore the rhythm of the beds themselves. And I think I would err on the length of the beds over having multiple openings, and whether or not the scale of those openings might be different. In other words, instead of having multiple ones, whether or not it would be better to have one larger one and allow the landscape to not take a rhythm from the bike racks, but instead maybe look at how it relates to the building better. Particularly as you start to work out the entrances and the canopies on the building. And then if we could go back to the plan. I tend to agree with Bill on the topic of how the beds are sort of speak to the building and the ground plane. And I would study whether or not you need to have that necking down at both corners. In other words, I think that the building is not particularly symmetrical, right? The doors are in different places, the canopies will be in different places. And while I think that there's a connection between the two, I don't think that it has to be, the landscape doesn't have to speak for itself. I think in this condition, since we've had to narrow that area quite a bit, and in making the building, making improvements to the building, if you could look a little more at how those two kind of speak to each other. It feels like an uncomfortable relationship in terms of the lines and the way one's body would move through there. The other thing I'll say is, and this is such a picky thing, but I'm just going to say it, on the corner between the crosswalks, you have that little piece of green. Those kinds of things never work, right? It'll become trash and mud, and just give it over to the city and let it have its way at that corner. It'll also help, I think, in terms of reading the building to kind of give that clear opening. And the last I'll say is, since we've had to diminish the presence of the landscape on North Beacon Street, think about doubling up trees, having lighter trees that maybe can be doubled up so that you have that, it's another tack to kind of strengthen the landscape and help it read with the the outline of the building. So I'll stop it there. I think everything else, I get what you're doing, and Arthur Street, I think, is going to be a pretty terrific path to go down. So thanks for the work. And I know this was all done in a flash over a holiday week. So thank you.
Thanks, Laura. I'm going to pass it on to David Manfredi.
Thanks, Mimi. First of all, tremendous progress from the first time we saw it. I was not at subcommittee, but I was at full commission. I think you really responded to the pleas to make it a more urban building and address an urban street wall on North Beacon. I do have to repeat, and I know we're not supposed to repeat, but I'm going to repeat two things that have already been said because I think they're really important. I agree with Bill. I don't understand why the building is not parallel to North Beacon on the North Beacon elevation. It does feel to me like an anachronism from the original design, and in some ways just so slight to be almost noticeable and almost annoying, and a little bit anti-urban, and that makes it harken back a little to where you were before. And so I reinforced that comment. And then David's comment, somehow I think to really invite retail on the street, to get restaurants, to create an active edge, that facade does have to become, David said, humanize it. I would say yes. Maybe it changes the scale, maybe it drops the sills so that you feel more invited. Maybe it's warmer, but at that street edge on Beacon, to be successful as retail space, I think that those have to feel more like a place in the building that I want to enter. And right now it's feeling very much like the building above, which I like. I like the building above, but it's a different set of criteria, I think, for that retail edge. Yeah, just along that edge, that nothing there is pulling me in. And I know you've been, as everybody has said, you've been working quickly, but the language of retail isn't there. You've brought the building down to the ground. And I think you really want this to be successful neighborhood kind of retail for that neighborhood across the street. There's other good things happening on North Beacon. So I'd ask you to look at that as well. Thank you.
Great. So happy to look at those.
Thanks, David. Catherine Morris.
Thank you. I have a couple of clarifying questions because this is my first time seeing this. What is currently here and what is across the street on the North Beacon side? Because that actually answers probably some things for me, if anyone can answer.
Yeah, across the street, we're looking at diagonally across a 2 to 3 story building, Catherine, there. And then did you say across Arthur as well?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand like what is around this.
Sure. And across the street on Arthur is essentially a single story building in a parking lot right now. It's sort of the old Volvo lot. So we're sort of imagining this site and that site as gateways on Arthur, but probably for future development mostly.
Okay. Good to know. I think what is striking me, and I agree with all the commissioners, I think what's striking me is in terms of the public engaging, I'm actually concerned about color choice of building materials. Feels like a lot of gray for me. And I'm thinking in the context of what is around there or what will be around there, how this stands out or is complementary to the things that are across from it or around it that concern me. So I just want to lift up considering another color choice in the context of on North Beacon and Arthur Street. And then the thing I do want to lift up is that at that ground ground plane level on the first floor in North Beacon, the hardship of trying to sell it as retail space, it will feel almost like Prudential Mall, where if you see a whole bunch of retail, you'll pass it because there's nothing to engage with it. You'll have more activation, yes, on your Arthur Street side, but that main side of North Beacon is almost a sweet spot. So it's almost as if you have to flip the design that you have at Arthur. You basically have to swap with Arthur and Beacon, the way that the designs are currently set up. So I'd really challenge you all to really critically think about, given that that's a main street, how to design in a way that's going to actually pull people in. Other than that, it's going to be as if a young person that's bypassing it is gonna, it's like a mall thing. It's just, there's just no engagement at all, which I think will go into some of the building material choices that you choose, particularly on the first floor.
Thanks, Catherine. Anne Marie.
Just want to add quickly, I like the change in massing. I do would like to see, as this project evolves, addressing how the building meets both the ground plane and the street, and to see the building in context. All of the views we've seen, while there are references to surrounding context, it isn't immediately clear to me how particularly the first story or two or three compare or relate or don't relate to both existing buildings as well as the development that's already underway. I think that's just an important aspect of thinking about the context, and then also ensuring, as my colleagues have mentioned, that the entrances are legible and there's a distinction between what's a major building entrance versus a retail entrance, and how do you make, again, the base of the building relate better to the pedestrian scale. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne Marie. And Amy Chambers.
Yes, I just wanted to, well, I suppose acknowledging the concerns on siting and the setback at the corner of Arthur Street, wanted to emphasize that I think this is one of the things that has evolved in conversation with our transportation planners in particular, as they have sought to find ways to emphasize our complete streets guidelines, and in particular to create what may feel like, although it's very prominent from kind of the overhead view, what may feel like a negligible shift as you get to that corner. I think they're seeking to kind of call attention to safety of pedestrians at that corner, and especially to residents who are in the low scale housing across the street, kind of bearing in mind that the Guest Street study calls for special attention to Arthur Street as a gateway, not only from new development to the train station, but from that housing to the train station. So, you know, I think as additional development kind of occurs across Arthur Street, that's something for us as planners and the design team to bear in mind as well. But I think even if there are recommendations to modify that, I know the transportation planners were really seeking to ensure that there was kind of space at that corner, and seeking to kind of balance that provision that's in the Guest Street study around how to treat Arthur Street.
Thanks, Amy. All right, commissioners, maybe I'll just, I think you heard a lot of great comments, Phil, and I honestly think you've been so responsive when we've, you know, every time we've met, that I just feel time is just not on your side with these comments, because I feel like you would have picked up every one of these comments, and even to the fact that perhaps you might have not had a landscape architect helping you last week is probably something that's not helping the situation. I will unfortunately jump on the bandwagon. The angle that you had previously was much more interesting, and it really was a parallelogram, almost parallel with the Hitchborn Street angle, and now it's neither here nor there. And the architecture does almost call for orthogonal conditions. That dynamic angle before was going to make it a little bit more interesting, but now you're kind of neither here nor there. So with that, I do think I think we should open up to public comment, and then we'll come back to the group.
Lizzie, if you wouldn't mind flipping the slide to the public comment. At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance that may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand using the instructions presented on the screen. Please keep comments to 2 minutes. Chair Love, it does not appear that anybody has their hand raised at this time.
Thank you. Commissioners, we need a motion for this project. Any thoughts before a motion is made?
So I'm sorry, is this project coming in for an approval, or is this is coming in for a full approval?
This is coming in for a full approval. The proponent got notice of a late change very recently, but I understand, the timing of financing makes it
I see.
important for this to go through to the board.
And if maybe I might speak for a second, I think we on staff definitely recognize that in the translation from the previous version of this to the current version of this, right? I think there were some opportunities lost and certain things that should be strengthened. And I think the proponent is committed to making those changes and picking up a lot of, or pretty much every comment that you made here tonight. And so to the extent that you're comfortable with it, with any provisos that you feel comfortable with, I know the team, will certainly make all of those changes and come back for an advisory review if you feel comfortable with that.
Well, then, I guess since we're in a proviso frame of mind, I'll make a stab at it. I'm sure I'm not going to catch all the comments, but I'll make a motion that we approve the project, the new project's massing and character, with provisos of additional study on the retail storefronts and street engagement, and the orientation of the street wall on North Beacon. Is that correct? Is that the right street? On North Beacon. And similar to the last project, I think it would be good for the proponent to come back to BCDC and show us ultimately the refined public realm that would result from those refinements.
That was a motion. Do we hear a second? Or
I'll second that.
Who seconded? Can I just, can I ask a question?
Of course.
Rather than saying, David, that you will encourage them to do such and such, that will come back to us for a later review. Why wouldn't we just almost demand that the storefront elements, the orientation of the street wall along North Beacon and the North Beacon ground planes be changed to some direction? In other words, my worry, quite frankly, is in this process, this leftover of the parallelogram is going. First of all, I had no idea the rest of the commission would agree with what I said as much as they did. But our experience would share with us that often we can do things with provisos, and in the end, the parallelogram still exists. Why can't we simply say that we will only approve this project based on the deletion of the parallelogram leftovers, the improvement of the storefront, I don't know how we define that, and the improvement of the ground plane along Beacon, North Beacon. I realize that.
So let me make another stab at it. Sorry. let me make another stab at it, which was that we're approving the project and the refinements to its new refinements to its massing and character, provided that the facade on North Beacon Street is reoriented reoriented as described, with refinements to the storefront, and that's harder to prescribe what the refinements to the storefront and the landscape around the storefront is going to be. So I think we're simply asking for refinement to storefronts and landscape. But to your point, the proviso is on making the adjustment to the massing along North Beacon. I'm fine with that if others.
That street wall alignment, I think you guys have pointed out something that's happened quickly, that's a bit of a leftover, so I think we're quite comfortable in that alignment.
Okay, well then that helps. Thank you, Phil.
We're very comfortable with that.
Yeah. So then that's the motion. The motion is to approve the project with the understanding that the orientation on North Beacon Street will be, I don't know what the right word is, normalized or
parallel.
It will be parallel to North Beacon Street, and with requests for further refinement on the storefronts and the landscape associated with the public realm on those streets.
And David, would you want to also address the question of whether the building's set back 25 feet or some other dimension?
I would leave that to the BPDA, frankly.
Okay.
I mean, as long as it's, I mean, that would be, because, you know, Laura, for example, made the good point that maybe there should be ins and outs on the landscape, on the building on that side.
Yes,
which, you know, which might be different dimensions. So I think, which I think is a really good idea, by the way. So maybe we just leave that to BPDA staff to flesh out with the proponent.
I think that sounds right to me, because there were some issues also relating to, you know, complete streets that are still being discussed. So I don't know how we could hold that dimension at this time.
Yeah,
All
I was
right.
going to ask Seth, I'm sorry, one thing, Mimi, I was going to ask Seth whether or not this is going to be an issue, our request that the orientation or the angle of the building, whether or not that was going to present a problem for the proponent with the Boston Transportation Department or Complete Streets.
I think it becomes a matter of, you know, how close the building is ultimately to the curb on North Beacon Street, how wide that sidewalk is. Even if parallel, right? If it's too close, it could create a potential issue on that corner. So I think we'll go through iterations with the proponent looking at the right distance for that building edge, and maybe the solution is in stepping back that corner to give it a little bit more space and plaza space at that corner, rather than stepping the whole thing back 25 feet or something.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
So David, I think we're going to ask you to do this one more time. I would just ask that, you know, it's approved upon adjusting the geometry of the North Beacon facade. However, I do think we should see the public realm improvements. Again, I do think that that's an important thing to see.
So I will make a motion to approve the project, subject to the adjustments to the geometry of the building as it meets North Beacon Street, with a proviso that the proponent come back to the commission to present refinements to the storefront and public realm along the North Beacon and Arthur Streets.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second.
Great. I'm going to call all the commissioners. Linda Easley,
Yes.
Jonathan Evans,
Yes.
David Hassin,
Yes.
Anne Marie Lubenow,
Yes.
David Manfredi,
Yes.
Catherine Morris,
Yes.
Bill Ron,
Yes.
Laura Solano,
Yes.
and myself, Mimi Love. Terrific. I think there's some work to do, but hopefully you'll have more time this time to make all of those adjustments. Thanks, Phil and
Great.
team.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your comments. Thank you.
All right, we are really running behind. So I think in the interest of time, let's move on to new projects. And to the extent we can be succinct, it would be greatly appreciated.
Just a reminder to the proponent team, we're going to set a 20-minute timer. So we'll give you a 10-minute warning, a 2-minute warning, and a 30-second warning.
And we'll start with a planning context slide from BPDA staff.
Phil, did you have something to say before they get
Well,
started?
can you share with us how many projects that there are left to see?
Two. This is the first of 2 new projects that we're going to see.
And the other is which one?
The other is 180 Western Avenue.
Okay. And then
So-
that's, or are there others?
That's it.
Okay.
Perfect. So I am going to present a zoning context slide and a planning context slide, and I will be quick. Parcel 12-290 Tremont Street requires no zoning variances as proposed. The use, height, setbacks, FAR, and parking are all in compliance with the code and provided here for your reference. The proposed use, affordable residential, and the benefits provided by the large community space on the ground floor to help to reinforce public space goals set out in Plan Downtown, which was adopted by the BPDA board at our December meeting. Next slide. And the site has been the focus of a community-based visioning process that has helped guide the proposed development on the site in response to residents' needs. One of the goals outlined in the process has been income-restricted housing in order to support development without displacement. In addition, this project helps to support the goals of transit-oriented development as outlined in Go Boston 2030. The Tufts Medical Center MBTA Orange Line stop is located immediately off the parcel. 290 Tremont Street is also a 10-minute walk from South Station and the commuter rail, as well as the Green Line at Boylston, the Boylston MBTA station. So with regard to all of that, staff do believe that this is a great place for the development of the proposed housing. And again, resources related to both plans and policy are on the screen for your reference. That's it for me.
Proponent team.
Thank you, Aaron. My name is David Vallecillos, and I'm a senior project manager with the Community Builders. I'm the project lead on the development side. I just wanted to say thank you to the commission and its members for having us tonight. As mentioned before, this is actually a project in partnership with the Asian Community Development Corporation. Is a project that we have been working for the past, I would say 10 months with them. It's a project that is moving very, very fast, and we're very excited to be showing you where we are today. We wanted to be thankful to the city of Boston, who actually selected us as a tentative developer last September and awarded us funding through the MOH department. Next slide, please. With that saying, as on behalf of TCB, we're excited to be working with Asian CDC. They have been doing a lot of community engagement around this parcel for the past few years, and they have kind of like holding us accountable on the programming side. So I'm just going to give a brief summary of the project programming. So we are proposing 132 units. This is 100% affordable or income restricted building. It's a combination of rental and home ownership. So as you're going to see on the upper right picture, the first 8 stories on the will be designated for rental. There are 96 units at a different. What we're trying to do is diverse income mix, ranging between 30% area median income up to 80% area median income on the rental side, and then providing 36 apartments at 80% area median income and 100% area median income. All this is actually has been led by community input in this past years. And based on that input, we have actually designated the majority of the units to be family-sized units. This is when you start going on the bottom left on the unit types, you can see that over 75% of our income unit types are 2 bedrooms or 3 bedroom with some 1 bedrooms, and this is equally distributed between the rental and the home ownership. So with that said, I'm going to transfer it to Stantec, and just to say that as we are speeding through our permitting and design review process, this is a project that has ARPA funds and that is aiming to go into the LIHTC funding round in February 15th. With that, Aaron, please. Thank you so much.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone, for staying late here. I'm here with Cesare Casella from Ground as well, our landscape architect. A few quick site context. We are really at the confluence of multiple neighborhoods right at the center of the city. The views on the left half of the page shows you how much of a missing tooth this is in this site context, especially the garage facade and the blank hotel facade being exposed as a pedestrian walking up and down Tremont Street. So we want to fix that as our design. On the right is the closed-in site height context, where we are well under the zoning envelope and well within the height and density context of the neighborhood. Challenges of the site, we definitely want to keep the Tremont Street frontage. The little parcel to the right is outside of our site boundary, but is well planted. So we're thinking about additional green space that connects this grove of trees. We want to address the connection aspect of the different neighborhoods by creating a passageway across our site, which is very evident in the fabric of this neighborhood, with many cross connections between those two different neighborhoods. A lot on this page, but the quick takeaway here is it's a very challenging shape to work with, to come up with a housing project that is feasible, but also holds all of these urban conditions that I just mentioned. In short, Tremont Street holding that strong frontage is really important for the project. Creating the green space towards the center of the site that leads pedestrians through to Washington Street from Tremont Street is extremely important as well. The dimension of the pinch point on the two triangular combination of the site does not let us to have a typical double loaded corridor across the whole garage frontage, which we want to cover up without having to do a single loaded corridor. So in the end, we found a sweet spot, which is a triangular shaped building with various articulations and a south-facing pedestrian walkway open to the sky instead of under the building, like what you might remember back in 2018, the proposal was. And then the bottom row is massing articulation looking at the building from the other direction. So Tremont is now at the back of the building. The triangular edges are addressing Tremont, the hotel facade, as well as the Tufts Medical. And to articulate this building with more finer details, we trimmed the corners off to address the pedestrian visual point. We pushed back the facade towards the facade facing the garage building to create natural light for 2 of the units. And we carved away additional areas along the passageway leading to the central green space to allow window openings that are looking away from the hotel building and into those main street and the open space areas. The concept of this project is based on an ancient Chinese poem written in the 800 AD. This poem really echoed with us because it reflects the mission and the spirit of our clients, and also echoes with the history and the residents of the Chinatown neighborhood. It's depicting this really beautiful image of the author hiking through the maple forest in a chilly autumn day. And it shows that sometimes the most beautiful things in nature and in real life are born out of really harsh environments. So we want to take the poem as a concept and translate it into architecture. And it's manifested through a series of colors that create gradients from the bottom of the building to the top, and picking up those colors from what you would typically find in a maple forest, from browns to reds to orange to yellows, and it opens up and brightens up towards the top of the building. And overall, this building fills that gap and becomes this really vibrant, memorable backdrop for the Elliott Norton Park right across from Tremont Street. We looked at very many options of how to create rhythm for this facade vertically and horizontally. It's following the residential module, and vertically we looked at a two-story base that echoes a lot with the theater district, the grand marquee at the base of those buildings, and then continue on with 2 stories and expand it towards the top with the 3 stories that works really well with the color expansion as well. The masonry facade is a very much a nod to the Bostonian, to the masonry context of the building. Warm colors with a lot of the details, which you'll see on this rendering over here. Different brick coursing that accentuates the vertical brick piers that takes you from the base to the middle to the top of the building, and then accentuates the multiple 2 to 3 story grouping of the building. And then this is a view from the central open space looking back at the passageway and the angular shape, both at the hotel angular shape and the Parcel 12 to 290 Tremont Street project. And I will lightly touch upon this, and then Kesri can fill in on the detailed landscape design. We are prioritizing the Tremont Street frontage with all the active uses. That includes a bike entrance, residential lobby to the community commercial space that wraps around the corner. And along the pedestrian walkway, which we are clearly demarcating with a curb where the service easement to the hotel is versus the pedestrian walkway. And along that facade, we have back of house space. And as you go further towards the central green space is our residential amenity space. One thing I do want to call out is there is an existing service easement to our neighbor hotel building. They have a trash area in this yellow box over here, and we need to provide access to this area, which will explain a lot why the open space has some of the curb shapes. So with that, Cesare, would you like to take us through landscape design?
Sure. Good evening, Commissioner, and thank you, Aaron, for anticipating some of the main urban design and landscape design goals for this project. One being the increasing the quantity of greenery and usable open space for the residents as well as for the public as a whole. And as well as to create a true block accessible connection between Tremont Street and Washington Street. Starting with Tremont Street, we are substantially increasing the pedestrian zone as well as adding a wide furnishing zone that will have permeable paving, street trees with structural soil, as well as bike racks. We are proposing a pull-off area that you see on the north side of Tremont Street, as well as a crosswalk that will connect the site to the existing park on the west side. As you can tell here, we are trying to use the street trees and the paving to wrap around the corner, and this was done with the clear intention of delivering the idea that this alley is not really an alley, but rather a public connection that is inviting people inside towards the east side where the courtyard is.
A little over half.
Yeah, the courtyard characteristics are we have 3 lily pad shaped seating areas surrounded by planting area, And we are trying as much as possible to differentiate what is vehicular from what is pedestrian. We are showing you tonight two high-level view. The first one is from the southwest corner, looking at the commercial space that is at the ground floor of the building. And on the left, you see how wide the streetscape experience is. And when you look at the right, you see how pavers and trees were used to deliver this idea of a public connection towards the courtyard that is at the end of that of this image on the right. In the next view, we have this view is shot from the opposite side of the site, from a corner of the courtyard. On the right, you see the building with the amenity space at its ground level that will help activating the space. On the left, you see our neighbors, the DoubleTree Hotel. We chose to use the pavers throughout the plaza to provide a feeling of warm and welcoming feeling for the users. For the same reason, we are having this planted area shaped in a way that they seems to hug the sitting area. And some of them, like this one in the foreground, will be raised to increase the feeling of protection towards the vehicular area that will be anyway separated by the pedestrian area by a raised curb. The planting palette and the hardscape material has been designed in coordination with the building, trying to be evocative of the image that Aaron has shown previously. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron and Cesar. I believe we'll open that up. Oh, we have one more presentation.
Everyone. So Megan Richard from Urban Design. I think to keep things concise, we don't need to spend time on this slide. If we can go, we think the building is coming along well architecturally. So I think we've been focused really on the site plan. And I would say the two most important aspects are making sure that the open space has as much greenery as possible. And then really making sure that the passageway and shared access drive is as open and welcoming to the public, considering that it is a shared access way and it will have vehicular passage as well as pedestrian. So those are really the points that I want to stress here. In the interest of time, we can move on from the staff perspective.
All right, I see a couple of commissioners' hands up. If we could have one slide up back from the proponent team, that would be great. And then David Hassan, go.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much for this presentation. Aaron, I always look forward to seeing your projects. I think this is a really, really beautiful solution to this very, very challenging site. And I find the reference very evocative. I feel like it touches on a lot of the points that Diana made in her initial presentation at the beginning of today's meeting about projects that reinforce neighborhoods and that strengthen Boston's character, both at the level of the ground plane, where there's this very kind of unusual public space, sort of non-orthogonal kind of public space that I think is handled very well here. But also with reference to the theatricality of the theater district, but also relating the project back to the neighborhood itself and the people that live there. So I am very enthusiastic about the architectural solution here. I think one of the things that it raises for me, and this is really an issue that I hope that the Asian Community Development Corporation and the BPDA can work together with the adjacent landowners, because there's a clear opportunity to significantly improve the approach to the DoubleTree Hotel on the Tufts side that could more naturally support and reinforce the public open spaces that you're making there. And I think it could be more permeable. I think that could be paved differently, even with cars parking there. It could feel like a seamless space that would, in my opinion, make a better public realm for your project and for the city, but also for the hotel itself. And I would hope that there could be some conversation that is happening with whoever owns that building about what the future of that site might be like. Similarly, as your building abuts the garage, I think there was some view where you have this, very beautiful colored striated facade that is coming up hard against a 10-story tall blank concrete wall that feels like an opportunity as well to potentially engage that garage building with art or with something. That building has been an eyesore in Boston for, as long as I've lived there. And here's an opportunity to actually make something of the garage, or at least the adjacency of the garage. Now, I know these are both things that are beyond the scope of this project and beyond the funding of the project, but I do think that it is something about something that the BPDA could engage with in terms of city building and weaving the residential and the theatrical and hospital uses in that area together. The Tufts public realm is not what it could be, and I think there's an opportunity here to really have a bigger conversation about how this linchpin project connects a number of different parts of this community together to make it not feel like what it is today, which is like basically a gap tooth in the city where everything kind of backs up to it. So from my perspective, on at least, I'm not going to comment on the specifics of the landscape, but from an architectural point of view, I think we should be able to, I would like to hope that we can move this project through quickly. And I do hope that the project can be used as an opportunity to strengthen its relationships to its adjacent neighbors.
Thanks, David. Catherine Morris.
Thank you, Commissioner Hassine. Thank you about the art. That you totally took the comment out of my mouth. Could we go to slide 10, if possible? Thank you. So just a couple observations I just want to lift up. So the building itself and the history and the connections and the colors all make sense. That part of the city definitely needs a revival, so thank you. Couple observations. So on the Tremont side at the ground floor level, this kind of embankment that extends out as like an additional sidewalk is probably a concern for me around congestion that's already existing on Tremont, and what that can mean with that addition to it. I understand that's context as to why it needs to be there, but it just completely shrinks the traffic flow on that side, which may be a safety issue for pedestrians and residents of the space. So that's one observation. And then two, the kind of service easement aspect where there is a built-in pedestrian connection. I'm not sure what the relationship is in the context of the DoubleTree, but what concerns me is that from a health perspective in the context of user experience, if that side of the DoubleTree is not enclosed and there's trash and things that are coming from that area, it may not make the experience or access to the green space a nice one. When I think about infestation and anything else that goes on when you have that coupled with heat and everything else. So I'd just be curious, or just things to lift up as you're considering about the experiences of residents and folks using this wonderful green space, how that may be affected by what the DoubleTree currently has there that will, in a long-term perspective, have impact on user experience. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Jonathan Evans.
Thanks, Mimi. Yeah, I agree with the comments. Really, really exciting project. Maybe starting on this slide here, I acknowledge what I'm going to say might be tricky, but what's really exciting is the massing generation around kind of connecting a through line, the open spaces through the site, and I wonder if there's any scenario whereby the sort of front edge of that community space building could be kind of nudged page north a little bit more, just to kind of create some more visibility to that open space and that easement and that path, so you know that there's something there to kind of walk to. Because right now, it seems as if the building is kind of blocking that, and I don't know if that also could be balanced by somehow making the kind of page northeast side, the top corner, you know, a little more building mass here, if it means getting this to kind of come back a bit. Again, that's might be not possible, but just kind of throwing that out there, just because the urban implications of what you're proposing is really exciting. Building massing, I think, is really smart, and I kind of really appreciate this is a really smart solution to a really tough site. I might just kind of, one part of your presentation I kind of keyed in on was your comment about how, oh, it's brick because everything around us is brick. And I almost don't want you to just have it be so unconsidered. And I do wonder if there's a way to sort of push against that, since this is such a transitional site. I think the sort of metaphor of the poem is really strong as a sort of inspiration, and I can see how that clearly led to the kind of color palette. But I'd almost, you know, this idea of you know, working through something difficult in that poem could be maybe leveraged more to think about the relationship with that metal panels to the brick, and really kind of pushing that a little further. But at a base level, what you have there is really exciting. It's a really smart massing, really exciting dynamic facade. But I guess I see where you can kind of push the registration of the brick a little bit more to just be part of that, and not just sort of take it as a given, as something that's sort of left kind of somewhat default. But again, overall, really exciting project. And yeah, I think the one thing also on this plan here, looking at that path connection, I really want to consider something along the face of that, you know, mechanical back of house run there on the building that just kind of creates something a little bit more dynamic to look at. I understand that we need, you know, buildings need to be serviced, but you know, is there a way to sort of make that facade acknowledging its need to be publicly engaging to kind of get you back along that path? But you know, again, overall, really exciting project.
Thanks, Jonathan. Linda Easley.
Thanks, Mimi. Yeah, I just wanted to compliment Aaron and Cesare on such a beautiful project. I really appreciated understanding its very clear partie with the poem that you shared, Aaron. I think there's a lot of really clever kind of architectural moves that you've made to accommodate this really difficult site, and love the fact that you've been able to really showcase some of that community commercial on the side. I'm glad that I'm following Jonathan, because my comment is the same. I think one of the strongest things about this site is that your building is really kind of embracing two open spaces, and you're at the crossroads of that. And so if there's a way to somehow connect those open spaces more clearly, either by moving that chamfered corner back a little, as Jonathan was saying, or to somehow highlight the mouth of that service easement street in a different way, with wayfinding and other types of tools, I think it could be really strong. A couple of other comments. Having the service easement become a real street, I think, is also a huge strength. I share some of the concerns about the movement of the service vehicles coming in and out of that space. One of the questions that I had is, with the trash pickup particularly, is whether that vehicle will actually need to be able to turn around in the park on kind of that northeast side, or what the movement is, because one of the surprises is that Cesare, the image that you shared, that's in the lozenge shape of that open space, that lozenge shape is pushed so far back into the site, and I wondered why that was, and whether it could be brought closer to the building, but it may be about that movement. So I don't know if you can quickly respond to that.
Linda, I think we need to look at it with civil to look at the movement again, and we can share more information about that next time, and we will try. From what I understand, is a really pretty on a diet, the vehicular part, but we will push to trying to reduce it further for sure.
great, because I just think that more of the soft surfaces in that part could be really welcome. The other quick question I had, and maybe the plan view makes sense to put up again, is that it looks like a fairly tenuous connection back to Washington Street. So I would just love to understand that a little bit more. And clearly you're going through land that you don't control in order to make that connection. I think the idea of a connection is really powerful, particularly if we can connect not only the two parks, but again, get back to Washington Street. And then the third is I really love David's idea of reactivating the garage facade. Again, I know that's off your site, but just in following the activation and the kind of beautiful kind of materiality, Aaron, that you're introducing here, you would just love to see that pick up some traction in some of the neighboring buildings as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Bill Ron.
Yes, I'll be very quick. Aaron, thank you for finding and then sharing with us the triangular shaped corridor system in the interior of the building, which really shows that this very simple shape is by far preferable to any of the others that you've studied in the past. And thank you for giving us a 9th century poem, which not only talked about color, but also talked about a slanting, stormy path. And so this slanting surface easement probably was why you gave us the poem in the first place. So Aaron, thank you very much for both of those things.
Thanks, Bill. Diana Fernandez.
Thank you. I'll be quick here. I just want to say that I think given our earlier presentation around the design vision, I do think that the architectural expression here really does align, I think, with those values of cultural representation and having it done in such a beautiful and contemporary way. So I just really want to applaud you on the architecture there. I do think that the poetics that translate into the architecture get diffused when it comes to the landscape, and particularly looking at programmatically how you intend on using that space and really thinking through how those alcoves with the planting are more strategically placed and open to the types of uses and program associated with the affordable housing and the families and children that will be here. So I think some sensitivity to that and some buffering of that sort of surface easement may also help in sort of thinking about, you know, how maybe the lily pad concept, I think can really create spaces for the community and the residents to gather here in a more effective way. Right now, they feel like islands that aren't necessarily connected in a broader sea of pavement. I know you're early on in that process, but I would really guide you towards sort of looking at some of the commissioner's comments specifically around how to open up that Tremont Street entrance and that view shed into the open space. And you know how the poetics of the building architecture itself can even translate into some of the landscape elements. I see that in your renderings you were looking at plant selections that align with some of that color expression, but I also would love to see how you can translate that into material expressions within the landscape itself and what those opportunities could be.
Thanks, Diana. Laura Solano. We can't hear you. I can't hear you. I
think we lost the audio.
Maybe we'll go to David Manfredi and come right back to you.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. Great comments from the commission. This is a really wonderful project, and just smart planning with the building configuration, your solution, and your demonstration, illustration of how you got here. I just want to make one comment, and I think it connects to what David said. There's got to be a way to find a connection to Washington Street that would tie all three of these, Washington to Tremont, and then further to the west. And I don't know if that's to the north, and I know I'm on someone else's property, but there's got to be a way to get that done, whether that's on the north where there's that little edge of green, or on the south where there's the entrance to the hotel, in a way that I think would just be such a public benefit. And whatever, whatever way the city can intervene to try to make that happen would be a wonderful thing. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Laura, do we have you back?
Can you
Yes.
hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, terrific. I think you've hit the sweet spot with the building for sure, on a really difficult site. So I'm going to keep my comments to the landscape and the site plan. I'm deeply concerned about the landscape. I think that you have done the best that you can, given the shape of the site and the needs of all of the housing that need to go on here, and you've done so successfully. And I have a very basic question, which is, what is this open space going to be, and who is it going to serve? Is it, in the end, really going to be a great amenity for the residents? I understand it's a public landscape, but right now it feels like it's neither public nor associated with the building. And I think that a very fundamental question has to be asked about how this space is going to be used. You know, there's a lot of discussion about how the connection from Tremont back to that landscape space can happen. And I think we have to face reality. There's not, it's a terrible connection, and it's nobody's fault. It is the reality of the site. And so I think we need to make that as good as we can, but I think the real question lies within the space itself and how it makes connections to other parts of the adjacent sites. One thing that is important for us to see is turning radii of how the service vehicles are going to work within that area. And we also need some perspectives down here to see exactly what it is people are going to see if they approach from Tremont Street. Yeah, I can see that. But I think it's important for us as a commission to really see those things that you are up against in this really tough site. I think that in seeing that and also understanding what the real views are down to this space, we can start to have a deeper discussion about how this space might be improved. You know, you've got the playground across the street on Elliott North Park. Does a playground belong here? There's really, you know, probably going to be a lot of kids in the building. Does that become a use? Is it a different, you know, is it a different kind of use that could be programmed? And what is that program? But I think that this is just such a tough site, and we have to think about what it looks like from Tremont Street and the fact that it is going to read as a service easement, and can that be ameliorated or not? And if it can't, then what is its relationship to the building? And is there the proper exit from the building? Is it okay for residents to feel like they can go through that amenity space to access that? I just think there's some deep questions here that need the rigor that was shown in the building. Because I don't think anybody wins in this space. It's a really, really tough area. But I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful that something can be done there. I'd also like to see sun shade studies in that area. I'm sure they exist. I know that this is supposed to be sunny, but I'm not really sure it is with the surrounding buildings, the hotel next door. So for me, that is the main thing to continue to look at on the site.
Yeah.
And
thanks.
that will add to the success of the building.
Thanks, Laura. I'm going to pass it on to David Hassin.
I know I'm not supposed to speak twice, but I spoke at the beginning, so I want to follow up. I really think that after listening to Laura's comments and David and a couple of other folks, you know, I think there are two abutting neighbors here. It looks to me like there is the possibility of access from the Tufts site on that narrow little thing there. I'm not sure to the north. And of course, there's the main entrance to the hotel itself, which has a Starbucks in the ground floor of it. And this DoubleTree Hotel, forgive me if the owner is on the call, but your room rates are going to go up as a result of all of these rooms looking out onto this new landscape and this, you know, much improved site. I think there is an obligation for the city to assist the CDC in having meaningful conversations with both of those abutters about how to connect this park through to Washington Street in one or both or multiple locations. Because to Laura's point, that's what's going to make this park successful. If I can walk by and get a Starbucks at the hotel and walk into that park and sit down and enjoy it, if someone from Tufts can have lunch there, because you know God knows there's no place to sit outside around there and have any kind of a nice space that's not in the shade. And of course, the neighborhood and the residents, if all of those people can access that space for one reason or another, then it will be successful. And right now it is a dead end, right? I mean, it is essentially a dead end, despite the implication of a connection back to the DoubleTree. So I'm hoping, you know, I don't know that this can be resolved in time for your February funding deadline, but I really do think that Seth and Diana, to the extent that we can help them make this green space. How wonderful would it be to be able to walk out of the lobby of Tufts Medical Center, walk through this park, along this thing, grab a cup of coffee and go into Elliott Norton Park. I mean, that's exactly the kind of like little connections that make Boston wonderful. So I think I feel like we should really that's a public realm issue, and I think we should really be pushing hard on it.
Yeah, I actually couldn't agree more. As if you look at the site context of the buildings, this is a really tough facade, literally has 0 windows, and it's a pretty tall building, and that service area is it's not attractive, but I do think that there's opportunity to at least have discussions with the owner with that. But David, I know you've been patient, you've taken your hand.
I'm recusing from
David, the proponent, I'm going to ask you, since you've been patiently waiting, if you want to chime in here.
I just wanted to appreciate everyone's comments and the candor of the message. Just very quickly, I mean, and I'm just going to address a little bit of Davidson's comments on the easement and the garage art. That's very funny. Like, we have been looking at how we can proactively think about this more active. And but at the same time is the candor of the message of saying, acknowledging that this is not our power, but kind of like working with our abutters and trying to figure that out, as we have an income restricted building in a very important site that is accessible to a lot of basic needs that families can benefit from, and that we have ARPA funds that have a clicking talk that needs to be utilized in the next 2 to 3 years because of the federal government restrictions on it. So we have been very cautious about those things as we really speed up this process. Another comment was, I feel the island experience, I just wanted to say that we're trying to take parking away, I think. While I think the driving lane, I think, remains the same, I would like to our traffic engineer to actually address these comments as a follow-up. I'm not 100% sure of what I'm saying, but I believe that that's the truth. And then the activation of, again, of the ground floor. If I could show you the 1,000 iterations that Stantec has been done to try to figure out how to activate that service easement and balancing that out, as we don't have power of like what happens there, but actually a negotiation with the neighbor. But we are really trying to figure out how that amenity space really talks. So like if you have a birthday party, how can you really, and I think maybe there is a chance to like maybe like switch a tree in front of the thing, so that like maybe if you have a birthday party, you can activate the whole thing, and maybe the island needs to speak up a little bit to less to the driving lane, but more to the community space. But we have really trying to be respectful of our abutter because of the legal rights that we're not sure like how he can like maybe delay this or not, and like really be in dialogue and respectful of that. And last but not least, given the time that we have, no, I think the sun studies, it's on the PNF, and we're happy to share them. So with that, I appreciate the candor of the message. We're right behind what you're saying. We're just moving very, very fast and really trying to like do the right thing by the tough site that we have and the funds that we have by the MOH, and trying to move this fast. But we do hear your concerns, and I'm wondering if there is some middle ground where we find each other at the middle, where we're trying to do the right thing. We have this limit, these funds that have a limited time into which we can use, or the city can lose them, so that we can hopefully get to the funding round with a positive note on where we are in the permitting process, knowing that these items should be addressed as we move forward, and that we have a willing, at least developer on our end and a design team to do those. So thank you, and sorry for taking a little too long on answering those questions, but I appreciate those.
Yeah, thanks, David. I feel like there's a lot of issues on the table. I think we all agree that the architecture is very sound and very positive. I just feel like there's still a lot of issues on the table, and I honestly want to open it up to Seth or Diana or Amy for some guidance here, given the constraint that they have with this financial approval. I'm clearly hearing it wants to come back to design committee because there's some pretty substantial items that need to be addressed that would improve the public realm.
If I may add, there's one piece of information that's not being shared clearly, and it's my fault. We are in conversations, I believe, with DoubleTree, the hotel owners to the south, and we're looking at a connection that is aligned with the Nassau Street, that's under the building street, right across from Washington, and it's through their existing sidewalk in front of the secondary entrance. So this is not showing it clearly, but this is our intention to get that connection across. So we'll definitely develop it further in subcommittee.
Yeah, that helps. If that could be pumped up, however it can be pumped up, that would I think make me feel much better about the viability of the park and myself. I wonder if we can approve the building separately from the landscape. I don't know if that would expedite things. Just a question.
I would just say a quick question on Aaron's thing, as like the developer and knowing the legal team and all the legalities and restrictions that we have had very positive conversations about that, and we hope to do that connection, but it's not guaranteed. So it is not our property. Just like the mural on the garage, it will be amazing. Like if we can have like a very cool mural, but it's not our like power to say, hey, I would love to, like, it's just we cannot say that. So that's the challenge part of like, how can we make this interesting and cool and active? It goes a little beyond of our power, and it's more of a collaboration. So while we might want to delay it, like we need to bring those players into the conversation, have that willingness from other players to do that as well. So while I just wanted to highlight that from a legal perspective, that as Aaron clearly pointed out, a very good point.
Thank you, David. Mimi, this is me, Diana, with the commission here. One of the things that I want to note is that, you know, the funding round that David alluded to here is in February. I do think this could go to subcommittee and come back in early February for a full commission vote, and still meet their deadline and criteria. So we do think that, you know, we may have a little bit of flexibility here to advance the project on the speedy timeline and get this team to their needed funded round.
Yeah.
But this is Bill. Let me ask you, Diana, do you think there would be any usefulness for us to approve the building but not the landscape now?
I do think, Bill, that's a discretion of you all as commissioners. I do think that there's great merit behind the building, and there's certainly some additional work, as we've all noted, around the landscape that can come back to the commission for additional review.
Because if that was the case, I would make a motion to approve the building so that that can go forward with a placeholder landscape, which I think probably wouldn't hold up their preparation of their funding materials, and send the landscape and its connections to subcommittee separately. If we can do that, I would make that as a motion.
David, the only caveat there, just to address, I guess, Jonathan's and my question, is whether kind of that map south chamfer might be able to move a little further north in exchange for the building moving a little further east on that northern side, covering up a little more of the building, right, as a swap. I personally would be interested in seeing that, or Aaron, just having you kind of talk us through, you know, why it wouldn't be possible.
Yeah, I think we can do that, Linda.
Well, if we can do that, then we could make that a proviso.
I have a question for Christina before any provisos or motions are made. Because this is a new project, remind me, do we need to get public comment?
We do.
Okay, let's do that. Let's go to public comment first, and then David, you could craft something if you so choose.
At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance that may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand using the instructions presented on the screen. Please keep comments to 2 minutes. To the chair, I see one hand raised. Peter, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Just I'm working very closely with Asian CDC for about 30 years, including both iterations of this project. And I just very quickly want to say, we are in deep discussions with the owner of the DoubleTree. We are being extremely careful in how we approach that. And we don't think pressure's the right move given the parties involved. And so I think we will get further on our shared goal here. If we're allowed to proceed at a pace that's consistent with his ability to respond and his ability to bring along the rest of his corporate structure. Similarly with Tufts, Asian CDC's been in a relationship with them for 30 plus years. This is, we're building R1 on what used to be their parking lot. And we're very deep in with them as well. And we feel quite confident that we'll be able to make good progress on the on what the remaining exposed portions of that facade will look like. And we're very committed to both those moves.
Apologies to the commissioners. I didn't realize, Peter, that you were a member of the proponent team. We must have missed that in previous coordination. Are there any members of the public that wish to testify? Okay, I'll turn that back to you, Commissioner.
All right, this is becoming a very long evening, and we need to make a decision here.
So I'm gonna float a motion. I'm gonna float a motion that and thank you, Peter. I appreciate the situation that you're in with both the butters, but I don't know both the butters. I just know that both of them haven't been great stewards of the public realm, and I'll say that out loud. Okay. I'm going to make a motion that we approve the architecture, the building, with a proviso that the opening that has been discussed be opened up more significantly to provide better flow into the new public space, and that we send the landscape to subcommittee so that hopefully we can bring both of them so that they can both be brought back. Well, I guess they don't, just so that hopefully the landscape can be brought back for the February meeting.
And if I could just put an alternate motion on the table, if we're going to see the project at subcommittee, and because the idea of moving the chamfer is, in my mind, so directly related to the
Yes,
success
you're probably right. Yes.
of the open space, I would make a motion that we send to subcommittee in hopes of, and I know Aaron and Cesare, this only gives you 2 weeks, and I think we're all very mindful that that's a very short period of time, but my motion is so that in hopes that we can see how both of those can support each other. If the building can be moved back, how does that support the opening and therefore the celebration of the open space, in addition to some of the improvements that we've chatted about today. So David, not trying to
no, I think you're right.
Be contrary, but
I think you're right.
That would be the motion to send to subcommittee with those particular things in mind.
I would agree, and since I haven't spoken yet, if I could just chime in that a motion to send it to subcommittee with a focus on the landscape, you know, taking into account the comments on the building, that the two need to be considered in relationship to each other, but attention should be focused on the landscape.
I'll second that motion.
Just first a clarification. Are we saying that the landscape is going to be at subcommittee this month, or are we saying that it goes as at its own pace? In other words, if the proponent team needs more time to study the landscape, can that extend out?
I think in my mind, the motion would be to send it to subcommittee, Laura, to look at both the chamfer position and also the open space. And I think then we could continue maybe to talk about the open space once we see. Once we see what we see.
I think that's right, because in an ideal world, we're going to we would like to send them back to the monthly meeting in February so that they can meet their funding deadline that they're working to. But hopefully that can happen in the next 2 weeks. And Anne Marie, I didn't mean to not call on you, but lots of hands raised. If you want to just repeat that motion one more time, that would be awesome.
I'll try a motion. I'm making a motion to send the project to design committee with the understanding, or with the focus on of attention on the landscape, with the understanding of, in general, positive support for the architecture of the building, but also recognizing that the two go hand in hand, and taking into account the comments from my fellow commissioners about modifications to the building.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second that. That's a better motion than mine. Thank you.
Great. Linda Easley.
Yes.
Jonathan Evans.
Yes.
David Hassin.
Yes.
Anne Marie Lubenow.
Yes.
David Manfredi.
Yes.
Catherine Morris.
Yes.
Bill Ron.
Yes.
Laura Solano.
Yes.
And myself, Mimi Love. I just have one request for the staff. When we go to subcommittee, if you could just tell us if there's any complete streets improvements planned for Tremont Street, because I feel like there's something that we just don't know what's happening to help inform that island bump out.
Certainly.
Great. I'm afraid we have one more project to do, but let's try to do it quickly.
Okay, I'm recused. I will say goodnight.
And I am recused too.
All right. Well, David and Bill, thanks for the time.
Okay.
All
Good
right.
night.
Everyone.
Good night.
Thank you to you for one more hour at this.
Kirk is.
Hopefully
I'm gonna
not an
call
hour.
Kirk back.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye. All right. So do we have a planning presentation on 180 Western Avenue?
Lizzie, can you advance to the planning slide? Great.
So commissioners, I am here to provide an overview of 180 Western Avenue in relationship to the zoning for the Austin Brighton neighborhood established in the Western Avenue Corridor Study and Rezoning Report, affectionately known as WACR-Z, and as referenced in the Boston Zoning Code. The proposed project complies with the zoning regulations regarding use height, setbacks, usable open space, lot coverage, and is below the maximum parking rates. Furthermore, the project has undergone significant design review impacting these elements, which my colleagues will present. However, it seeks relief in floor area ratio, aiming for an FAR greater than 4 with an affordability incentive of 17% at 60% AMI, area median income, which is below the affordability incentive established in WACR-Z. In order to comply with WACR-Z, the project may remove the mezzanine parking, which is not expected to impact the overall building massing or design. Next slide, please. Of note, the proposed project achieves many of the goals outlined in WACR-Z, including a focus on housing, creating small-scale retail at the ground floor, accompanied by pocket parks, connecting and advancing a safe and accessible streetscape for multiple modes of transportation. Additionally, the project is refining the approach to sustainability and resilience. And in closing, the project is well positioned to address zoning, planning, and policy goals by determining a final approach to affordability aligned with either WACR-Z or the inclusionary zoning amendment, which will officially take effect in October of this year. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have, but otherwise I will turn it over to my colleagues.
Thanks,
The
Amy.
proponent team will have a 15-minute presentation. We'll give you a halftime warning, a 2-minute warning, and a 30-second warning.
Good evening, everyone. Commissioners, thank you for your time. I'm Emily Paparella with Elkis Manfredi Architects. I'm joined by Christina Hoover. And also on the Zoom with us is Doug Jones from LeBlanc Jones Landscape Architects, and of course, our proponent, Samuels and Associates. The proposed project is a mixed-use residential building. It's 7 stories with 274 apartments and a little over 12,000 square feet of retail space. 180 Western Ave is located at the intersection of North Harvard Streets and Western Ave. And it's an important intersection because it creates a gateway to this neighborhood, and also because it's becoming a walkable neighborhood center. To the south of our site is a fine grain texture of primarily 3-family and single-family residential buildings. And to the north of our site is Continuum, 175 North Harvard Street, and further north, the Harvard Stadium and athletics fields. The Harvard Business School is to the northeast, and along Western Ave, our neighbors include Harvard Science and Engineering Building, and further to the east, the future Enterprise Research Campus. To the west, on Western Ave, new development includes the Nexus campus with buildings on both the north and south sides of Western Ave, some of which are currently